committee members with us, and we are still waiting for Member Hart, I believe, to jump online. We are going to go ahead and get started. And so Jerry, you said to let you know when we're ready. I don't know if you're recording, but we're ready and we're going to start. So. Before we jump to agenda items, I want to remind the public and committee of just a statement or a comment that was made yesterday regarding the agenda. You can see online that there's 4 items that have been canceled and will come before the committee in February. Those are the school counseling program model and the rule that goes with it, R277-462. Additionally, the school counselor services document and the rule that accompanies that as well, R277-464, will be discussed in our February, I believe February 2nd committee meeting. So with that, we do have Brooke Anderson, and she is with us online. She is going to make a public comment. And so Brooke, you're the only public commenter. If you want to take 2 to 3 minutes, that would be great. Go ahead.
Will do. Thank you. Thank you for the time to speak. My name is Brooke Anderson. I've worked in assessment accountability with Jordan District for the last 8 years. I'm speaking about the last item on your agenda today, the proposed change to R277-406, setting the reading on grade level cut score to 410 composite score on Acadience, which equates to a 750 Lexile. I believe this cut score is too high to accurately reflect how I and other educators understand the term reading on grade level. For context, there are 4 performance levels on Acadience reading: above benchmark, at benchmark, below benchmark, well below benchmark. A 410 composite score, 750 Lexile equivalent, is higher than the cut score for above benchmark performance on Acadience reading. So students meeting the benchmark or at benchmark are currently considered reading below grade level. This has been a source of confusion in our district because we were interpreting students' risk of not reading on grade level using Acadience reading levels of below benchmark and well below benchmark. To add to that confusion, in the August 19th, 2023 edition of the Salt Lake Tribune, there was an article about reading on grade level in Utah with the claim that only 48% of students do so. The article ended with a dire warning from the Director of Teaching and Learning, Jennifer Thronson. Helping students become literate is crucial as it predicts quality of life in adulthood. For example, 70% of incarcerated adults cannot read at a 4th grade level, according to a study by the National Center for Education Statistics. Illiteracy predicts whether you go to jail. It predicts whether you need to be on food stamps. It predicts so many things. Being able to read is that kind of ticket to success in life, end quote. So this article tells me that the reading on grade level indicator is meant to predict illiteracy, likelihood of imprisonment, likelihood of being on food stamps, etc. In other words, it's meant as an indicator of risk. So is USBE implying that 52% of Utah students are more likely to go to jail, be illiterate, be on food stamps because they don't meet this above benchmark 410, 750 Lexile expectation by the end of grade 3? To me, this doesn't add up, especially when I look at our actual student outcomes. I took the 3rd grade reading scores for Jordan's current high school cohort and compared their grade 3 Acadience scores to their number of arrests, suspensions, and other high school ELA outcomes. Are students not meeting that 410, 750 cut score more likely to be arrested or referred to a court? No, they are not. The students most likely to be at risk for arrest, suspension, expulsion, etc. are students in the well below benchmark range. And the cut score for that range is 280, which is 130 points lower than the proposed cut score. Where I do see a difference in high school outcomes for students not meeting that 410, 750 cut score is in their access to AP coursework, honors courses, their likelihood of scoring proficient in reading on Utah Aspire Plus and on RISE. So This CUS score seems to be an indicator of access to college career readiness coursework and advanced coursework, rather than being an indicator of at-riskness, okay? So the question for me is, does the board intend for the reading on grade level metric to be an indicator of risk or an indicator of access? It can't serve as both. There is too much middle ground between those two indicators. So I would ask the board for clarity about what not meeting this CUT score implies for students. If you are told that a student can't read on grade level, what is that supposed to mean? My understanding, based on the way the term is used publicly and in other states, is that not meeting a minimum threshold, that it means not meeting a minimum threshold, and that you are actually at risk of adverse outcomes. But this meaning doesn't match where the CUT score is being set. So thank you for your time. Please reach out if you have any questions. I have sent you an email, so you can respond to that email. Thank you again.
Thank you, Brooke. We look forward to this discussion later on in the agenda. Appreciate your time and your work. Welcome, Member Hart. Online, we have a full committee now. Let's jump to 1.6, R277-308, New Educator Induction and Mentoring. This is a continuation, and is Ben online? There he is right there. Ben's going to go ahead and set us up for this one.
Good morning, Chair Hymas. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practice. Good to be with you this morning. I'm going to tee this up and then I have to head over to finance, but this one should be fairly straightforward. This is a sub for its 5-year review, the new educator induction and mentoring program. We consulted with staff. They feel like it's running as expected and are not asking for any changes to the rule. If you have any questions about the program, Katie Jones is here and Malia Hyde is here as well. They can answer those questions, but the requested action today is simply to continue the rule for another 5 years.
Thank you, Ben. Committee members, any questions? Member Wood?
I just had one question that was kind of related to our conversations yesterday about Apple programs and university programs. On line 45, I think it says an LEA and a Utah-approved university-based education preparation program may partner in implementing the induction program. And I see that, they're just working together to make sure we have these mentors. Where did the Apple programs fit in terms of getting the mentors? Is it local to their, the LEAs that they're in? They just provide them. It's just more of information for me rather than the role.
Dr. Hyde, do you want to pick that up? Or I guess.
I probably best to answer that one. Malia Hyde, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. Good to be here today. The Apple programs work in collaboration with the LEAs. And so most of those Apple programs are sponsored by the LEAs and some are a large consortium of LEAs. And so typically what we see in Apple programs is that the mentor who is supervising someone as they're becoming a professionally licensed educator is also providing the induction services and things that are included in this rule.
Thank you, Dr. Hyde. Any additional questions? Member Lear?
So just as a follow-up to that, is there any need to have anything about that Apple program in this rule, like on or about 90 or line 45? Or
No.
is it assumed?
Yeah, because Apple programs are approved. Oh, I see. A university-based educator preparation program.
You need to add.
Yeah.
May I add, Chair?
Yes,
I
Dr.
think
Johnson.
for I have Royce right behind me, so I'm thinking of our charter school Apple program. They're not an LEA. They're not a university prep program. So Malia, it seems like we probably should add Apple as well in here as an amendment.
It may be appropriate just to strike university-based and just have it be an approved Utah preparation program.
I like that, as it would align with what we did yesterday as well. So
Is it anywhere, and then follow-up question.
please.
Is there anywhere else in the rule that same issue arises? That I could look at it too. I'm being really lazy, and there's a reason for that. Okay, all right. So just that you would fix anything similar in the rule. Is that right? Okay.
Can I make that motion?
Yes, please, Member Wood.
Okay, I would move to strike university-based on line 45. So it reads, an LEA and a Utah-approved education preparation program may partner in implementing the induction program.
And make the remaining.
And make any changes.
Oh, and align any other areas in the rule.
Yeah, that's the only instance of university in the rule.
That's what I thought as I read it yesterday. We had had such a big discussion in
I
board
had to double
meeting.
check myself.
Okay, Member Wood, will you check the screen, make sure that your motion is correct? Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee strike university-based from line 45. Would you like to speak to that, Member Wood?
I think we did.
Okay, any other questions or discussion to that? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Member Lear, go ahead.
It doesn't affect the vote, but on. I'm not trying to be ticky-tacky, but I might as well tell you now. On line, it said between, on line 53, facilitate sharing best practices should be among LEAs as opposed to between. Yeah, so it's just. On the spectrum catch.
Okay, so that brings us,
I'm just gonna note it here so we don't forget to do it.
okay.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, I'd seek an underlying or an overall motion. And I will go ahead and make it. So I move that well, I put it out there. Put your microphone on for us then.
I would just like to make a motion that the committee approve R277-308 Draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. That's why you're Vice Chair. Yeah, the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-308. Sorry, I got that confused with the different rule that we spent a lot of time on yesterday. I'm going to start over. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-308 Draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. Okay, on to agenda item 1.7. This is R277-912, law enforcement related incident reporting. Again, this is a continuation. And I know Ben's in another meeting, so Angie's gonna cover it. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. So this rule R277-912 is before you today because it's up for its 5-year continuation and review and continuation. I believe that Aaron Bruff is here in the Zoom room and available to help answer questions. But essentially, this rule requires the superintendent to collect a report and on law enforcement related items. So school resource officer, different incidents on the school grounds.
Thank you, Angie. Any questions from or motions from the committee? Member Wood?
I would move on line 25 that we delete beginning in the 2022-2023 school year.
Okay, so there is a motion before the committee. We'll make sure that we get that correct on the screen.
On line 25, beginning in the 2022-2023 school year.
So it would start with an LEA shall report. Okay.
Right.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee strike beginning in the 2022-2020 or -23 school year on line 25. Discussion, Vice Chair Carey, or did you want to speak to that, Member Wood?
No, it just seemed like we're in 2024. This will go on for 5 years. We should eliminate those past references to date.
Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I'm in support of the motion, but I want to speak to the general. I'm in favor of the amendment. I want to speak to the general motion.
Let's go ahead and vote on this motion quickly, and then we'll get back into discussion. So the motion before the committee is that the motion before the committee is that the committee strike beginning in the 2022-23 school year on line 25. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. Back to you, Vice Chair Carey.
Thank you. You know, this particular amendment is about law enforcement related incident reporting. And I was down at the Capitol getting ready for the legislative session. And it was brought to my attention that USBE represented that school safety was not a priority for USBE during this legislative session. And I told the legislature that just can't be true. I mean, that there's no way that can be our official position as USBE, that school safety is not a top priority. And I think it's top 10 that we submit. And I was emphatic that no, that can't be right. That has to be wrong. So I reached out to several members of USBE staff, including members of the superintendency, and it's not wrong that in our official priority submission to the legislator for this legislative session, school safety is not a priority. And there's a bureaucratic reason for that was explained to me, which makes sense. But in that same written explanation, it was clear that even though the bureaucracy is the reason it's not a priority, that those same rules do allow this body to reprioritize. And I have reached out to board leadership. I will continue to reach out. I think it is a mistake that could have unintended consequences. And I just think when the legislature, they establish a task force, Deputy Norman has served on that task force. I've attended the meetings of that task force. When our legislature, when our law enforcement are all meeting and saying this is a priority for public schools, for USBE to take the position that it is not, I just don't think that's wise in a policy sense, but even more unwise are the risk, the unnecessary risk we are taking with students and their safety by not making this a priority. So I will be voting against this motion for a variety of reasons, but I did want to take the opportunity to, one, go on the record as saying we need to fix it. School safety needs to be a priority for USBE in this legislative session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. I believe, I could be wrong, but this afternoon, as we talk legislative session, this would be the place to bring this up and ask to relook at. This rule, just to offer clarity to anybody who's listening, is to ask for reporting from LEAs so that we understand what's happening in the schools. It has nothing to do with the law enforcement coming in. Well, I shouldn't say nothing to do, but right. So, yeah, these are incident reporting. That's what this rule is about. So I just want to clarify that. And then, well, Member Lear, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, briefly, not spend as much time studying this as apparently member Carrie has, but maybe living it for a long time. This rule seems to inform the board's involvement with school safety. If we know more about it, we have more data. So I think that this is obviously one small piece of it, but that to me, this helps us understand it, and then it may cause us to rethink our priorities.
Yeah, you're right. If you look, line 18 through 21, right? Arrest of a minor, other law enforcement activities as defined in section 53E, right? Disciplinary actions as defined in 53E, all of their data. So we're just collecting, seeing what is happening.
Right.
And as we look at this annually, we can see if there is growth or additional concern as things
Right.
move forward.
And just a quick follow-up to that, this clearly one element of school safety is students with guns, and this would show us if students have guns. So I think getting this information would be extremely helpful toward the end of understanding our school safety issues.
Yeah, thank you, Member Lear. Vice Chair Carey, back to you, and then Member Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I think this is great. I think this is a wonderful tool. I am opposing it today because as I've reached out to members of law enforcement, sheriffs, chiefs of police, their concern is that it doesn't provide enough insight and enough data. So this is not in opposition to the gathering of this information, but rather we need to do better. You know, times have changed, unfortunately, not for the better when it comes to student safety in our schools. And I think the tools that we use to collect and address these threats also need to evolve. So I just don't want to rubber stamp this because I think it's much too important. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. We have Member Wood and then Member Hart. We see your hand and we'll get you right after Member Wood.
So 2 comments. One is this is required by law. And I guess maybe I would question to Deputy Stallings, do you remember which law? It's been a couple of years where this was required. And I think we tend to do exactly what the law tells us to do. So I would ask Member Carey, what would you add? That's the point of it coming to our committee. If it's not doing what we need it to do, what is missing?
Yeah, I know. So there's a question directed at Vice Chair Carey. Member Hart, do you want to yield or do you want to, is it okay? If Vice Chair Carey goes or, okay.
Yeah, and that's just it, Member Wood. The one thing I've learned from attending the Legislative Task Force meeting on school safety and attending various events that law enforcement have sponsored regarding school safety is that I don't know enough. And so I'm deferring to them. And as I've talked to them about what can we do to enhance this rule, they look at it and they're putting, I guess, their concerns on the table. And once I have those will be the amendments that I will be making. And I'm happy to provide those when I receive them. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Hart?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I just want to be really clear. The priorities we have that the board can, or that our staff can speak on are financial priorities. That doesn't preclude us from addressing policy priorities in our meeting this afternoon. We can definitely talk about it. But just to be clear, anybody that filled out the survey, any board member that filled out the survey about financial priorities got to weigh in on those and was part of prioritization. So just to be clear about what we prioritized, it was the priorities that exist are based on financial priorities. Just wanted to clarify it for the record, anybody watching.
Thank you, Member Hart. Member Wood, you have a question on your face, but Go ahead.
My husband tells me I have to work on that. So was this HB 61? Was this just last year? Okay,
No, this was a bill that passed. Senator Andrade ran it a couple of years. I mean, it's been quite a few years, actually.
okay.
But because it was a new request for data sharing and it included law enforcement data, LEA data, and they had to kind of overlay that. It took a while for all the agencies to get those data to us. So actually the first report related to the section of code was published this fall of 2023. I was going to try and see if I could find it, but as you know, our website is a little, I probably could find it, but I didn't know if it was of interest. We could share that report with you. I could send it to the committee if you'd like, but it's not HB 61. This
Okay, I
predates
just
by
looking at
quite
the
a few
effective
years.
date, it appeared like, oh, this is pretty recent, but that makes sense. So thank you for that clarification.
So, yeah, I had just mentioned off to the side that it is not uncommon. It's not, I wouldn't say it happens every year, but it's not uncommon for the board to add priorities after the October board meeting because as board member Carrie stated, the state board is required to submit our business cases / funding requests to the governor's office in early October. And oftentimes we start working on those, as you know, as early as May and June. And so the school safety or the school security task force's recommendations for funding, I don't believe occurred until their November meeting. And so that was not in place in the timeline that we normally use to prepare our funding requests. However, the board does, as board member Carrie stated, has the authority to change its priorities at any time. And in fact, I was just mentioning to Chair Hymas that you may remember the educator directed hours. That funding request came, and board member Lear, I believe that you were the one who actually requested that, I believe in December. And we did add it, the state board did add it to its priorities and it passed that session. It became a priority for the legislature as well. So to board member Carrie's point or board member Hymas, I can't remember who made this point. This afternoon, the agenda was broadened to allow for action this afternoon related to funding requests. So if the board would like to add anything to its priorities or discuss a funding priority related to school safety, that could be part of today's discussion.
Thank you, Angie. Seeing no other, Member Wood.
I move that the committee continue R277912 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. I said draft 1.
Draft
Does
1
it need
as
to be
amended.
draft 2? Oh, as amended, because I did remove the date. Thank you. Draft 1 is amended.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion on the floor is that the committee continue approve. Okay,
Well, we can say continue.
either way, let's fix it.
Let's do that. I apologize.
That's okay. So the motion on the floor is that the committee continue and approve R277-912 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. And any opposed?
For the reasons stated, I'm going to oppose it at this time.
Thank you. That passes 4-1 with Vice Chair Carey in opposition. Moving along to our next agenda item. This is agenda item 1.8, annual training requirements brief, and we have Dr. Thronson here to cue us up.
Good morning, Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Just a reminder, we had this initial discussion as part of the reporting task force in the last board meeting in December. And as part of that, this was referred to this committee, or at least to committee, to just get a little more information, get some more details, as the board indicated some interest in a few key pieces that they requested. So those were what would it look like if the state board took on some of these educator training requirements and wanted staff to provide some recommendations on Could they include pretest logistics, which is in my mind competency? Like, is there a way for someone to demonstrate competence, partial competence, and be able to opt out of certain portions of the training if they had competence? What content would that include? And then some of the logistical commitments if the board were to enter into designing some of these trainings. The other piece that came a little more informally in board meeting was a request to make sure it was a complete document and that the links and all of that. So I went through and updated it. It was a document we had created in 2019 that I had done some revisions to in preparation for December, but given the board's decision to look at all the trainings, I did go through and look at anything that was added, and there was 2 or 3 more trainings between 2019 and 2023 that had been added over the years. So those are in there. You have just a brief based on the 4 requests from the board. One of those was like update the brief to cover all of the things. And so those 4 things were update the annual training requirements. What about pretest? What are the sample trainings? And then finally, like sample trainings would be like, give us examples from other districts and what we have and those things that are available just to see what they look like. And then the final area was like, what would the cost be to do 1 or more of the trainings? And so that is what the brief that you have in front of you includes. If you've got questions, I did get some more information from Ogden School District, the HR director there, Jessica Bennington. She works with all the HR directors and did a survey in response to the board's request. It was like, what trainings do you have? And a lot of them responded vector, 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 vector. And I was like, what's Vector? And so Vector is basically a dashboard that many of them have purchased to house their trainings. Vector has actually designed some state trainings for the state of Utah in collaboration with USBE. They've said, hey, would this be approved for the training requirements? And then they load that into the Vector system, and it gives basically a dashboard for educators, and you can assign by role and position which trainings and kind of track the educators to make sure they're meeting all of those requirements. So one of the things that brought to my lens was, okay, if we create it in Canvas, for example, we have a lot of LEAs that would need it in Vector. And so I wanted to investigate, like, what's the cost of doing Vector? It sounds like it's $1 per teacher for us to be able to upload any of our content into that. So we have 30,000 educators. I don't know that we have 30,000 educators being used in the state on Vector. We have a number of LEAs using it, but not every LEA uses it. So just to give you some pricing there, that wasn't included because that conversation has happened the last few days with Vector as I learned more and have been able to connect with them. So that would be something for the board to also consider. Do you want to just build it in one platform if we build anything? And typically we would use Canvas because everyone has access to Canvas, and whether we would want to also support being able to load it into Vector so that LEAs that are using Vector could have it, or they could be the ones paying for that training to get loaded into Vector would also be an option. So lots of layers. This will probably be a good discussion depending on if you're even interested in doing any of this work, but that is all of my investigative research for this project.
Thank you, Dr. Sronson. I know that we're early on in the stage here, but in this area 2, pretest logistics, excuse me. We talked about doing a pretest and then a training based on what they, demonstrate their current knowledge to determine what additional learning they may need. I don't know how that would look. Now you're looking at 1-to-1 training for every.
So it would be based on the system. So Canvas has an option that you can build competency-based pieces in there. And so let's say it's 5 modules for this training. You can take an assessment that says you need module 3 and module 5, and then it only assigns you the ones you didn't demonstrate competence on. The way Vector has some of this functionality, what they do is if you've taken the training 1 year, and now you have to take it again, it's been a year, 2 or 3, you can then do a competency assessment. Like the first time you take it, they just make you take it. They're like, we don't know that you know anything. We're just going to make you take it. And then the second time you take it, they have a competency assessment that allows teachers to demonstrate. Like, I still remember bloodborne pathogens from last year. I can demonstrate my competence and not have to do the training, if that makes sense. So there's different ways it could be done, but ultimately Canvas does have the functionality to do that. I reached out to UETN and said, Justin, can it do it? And it can, which is awesome. So we could build training modules into Canvas where teachers would actually take a pre-assessment first, and then depending on the results would get all, part, or none of the module for training.
Is it possible to, I mean, I know it's possible. We've seen it before, right? You take the test first, but if you click the wrong answer, the module shows up and you're like, oh man. I gotta do
That's it.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you say, I mean, I know this is just an example, but 5 modules per training. In your additional considerations for the board, with there being over 40 trainings required by law. I mean, this could get overwhelming quickly if I'm just saying to educators, well, jump on your computer.
Yep.
Look at the pages and pages worth of modules, right? I'm going to lose teachers.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I mean, you're already doing it, right? Some of this is done in staff meetings right before school comes. Some of it's done in various ways. And not all of them are required every year. So when we talk about 47 trainings, some of them are annual, some of them are some of them if you are in that position. So if you have a kid with diabetes, then you have to go through the diabetes training. But if you don't have to go through the diabetes training. So to be clear, as an educator, I don't have to take all 47 every year, but there are numerous ones, and some of them might be 5 minutes. The flag comes to mind. It's not an actual required training, but a lot of LEAs want to make sure that people remember you're supposed to do the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And so that can be a 2-minute, remember, you're supposed to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's what that looks like. Training done. Next.
And it should be, but whenever I think of jumping online, because I've done this for coaching and ecclesiastical and community service, for some reason, there's like this minimum requirement of it must take an hour or more, right, on any training. So if we can focus those, then yeah, I'm all for that, right? I don't need 20 minutes on remembering to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah. And there's no time requirements in any of the laws. So we can do, I wouldn't call it the bare minimum, but the expectation is you have the knowledge you need. So like bloodborne pathogens, that doesn't need to be a 30-minute training, right? Like you can make those shorter as long as we get the essential elements covered. So there's nothing in rule or law that says they need to be this long. And if that's a kind of recommendation that comes from the board, make them as long as needed rather than you need to have every module be 30 minutes. Because my intention is,
Okay.
I'm going to have to take these as an educator. I want to
So
make sure they're functional and quick.
Staff is aware of the time that teachers do not have.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to actually write this one down because it's not in there, but this is, as you guys have this conversation today, I'm going to take notes on what is kind of desired, and then we can do a summary for the full board meeting, depending on what motions come out of this meeting today. But one would be make it as long as needed, but as short as possible would maybe how I would frame what you're suggesting.
Member Lear?
And let me just preface this by saying I haven't probably spent the time I would like to have in looking at this issue. We're concerned with a lot of things yesterday. So if I'm asking really low-level questions, forgive me this one time for not doing my, as Chair Huntsman used to say, not doing my, what did he call it? No, he called it something else that was a little strange, but anyway, in advance. First of all, I'm understanding that these are just examples of training, but I wondered if you had looked at Vector and to see, is it a good platform? Do you think it's effective? That's just my first question.
Yeah, so I met with Jessica and she screen shared and showed me the platform. Great functionality, great tracking. It's visually appealing, like in terms of like, okay, I can sit down and look at this. And you've got a few screenshots later in the packet of just what Vector kind of looks like. It's just a little dashboard with like, here's your trainings that you have to take. And it's quick and easy to get into and navigate. So I found it a useful tool. I can see why so many LEAs have adopted that as their platform.
Thanks. That's helpful because I haven't really processed that.
Yeah, no.
The second thing is I think I personally and the board generally is kind of in a catch-22 regarding this training issue. 47, you're right, sounds like a lot. I hear Matt, I hear the other board members who are literally in the classroom now talk about how burdensome trainings are for teachers. On the other hand, we had a discussion at the very end of the night last night that is always frustrating with the many teachers who apparently don't know how they're supposed to behave. And we can opine all we want about, well, that's just ridiculous. Everybody knows that they should do that. But when the penalties are so great, I think we have an opportunity at the front end, and I'm just belaboring this one issue. But I think we, as a board, have a real responsibility at the front end to say, these are your requirements, ethical requirements as a teacher. Even if some people think, oh, that should go without saying, that, what kind of a human being are you, et cetera. And I know that ethics training that exists is useless. And the other point I wanted to make earlier on is probably I hear more complaints from educators about training, the uselessness of it, than anything else, which is not to say that the issue is not important, just that the training we have, or maybe education generally has developed, seems to not be effective, not taking away from the responsibility of the user either. But so I would hope we could maybe add to this list teacher ethics, and look again, I've said this every year for, let's say this would be 7 years now, that you look at that NASB training and see if it's getting more affordable, because I have actually looked at 45 minutes worth of that, and it is the best training I've ever seen in teacher ethics.
For ethics. Mhm.
So I hope that, I know that's one very small piece of this, but I wish we could look at that and see that, and see if it would be helpful to purchase, to make available, to, as we're discussing training, this seems like an opportune time to mention that. So if we're going to keep doing training, if it's going to be required, then for heaven's sakes, stop fighting the requirements that seem to come mostly for the legislature and make it worthwhile. Don't just keep going through the motions. Pledge of Allegiance, I agree, ridiculous. 30 seconds. We don't need to be trained. Teachers don't need to be trained on the Pledge of Allegiance, but they're not going to lose their job over not doing the Pledge of Allegiance with their students perfectly. They are going to lose their jobs or the ability to get a job. I mean, even lower level disciplines keep them from being employed. So I think we have a real responsibility at the front end when our penalties at the back end are quite draconian. I know that's a soapbox speech, and I'm sorry,
No,
but I got it out of
fine.
the system
I just,
for a while.
I want to agree with you. Not saying that I'm not. I want to, but I'm not. But I do agree with you. But there's this fine line in training, because all of these are great. And even you said the NASB one, you were 45 minutes in, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, 45 minutes just for teacher ethics. Okay. There's this fine line of losing somebody, right? Kind of like what do they say on a YouTube video? You have the first 20 seconds or something like that before you either finish or don't watch them. Anyway. So, and I think that's where staff has to do this, right? Because too short, it's meaningless. Too long, it's meaningless. Where is that line? That's the sweet spot that says this will keep our educators engaged and give them the information that they need to be successful. Because I do agree, we can't just assume that because you're an educator and you've gone through the process, you know what you're doing. We see it too many times in our UPAC.
Well, and
Problem,
again,
so.
not to, but being a little more informal, it's not just the length either, it's the effectiveness. And when I say I was 45 minutes in, I was looking at a variety of issues, financial issues, boundary issues. So it wouldn't be that every teacher would have to take 45 minutes worth. It could be segmented, but it was very compelling. It was interesting. It wasn't asking questions that every person would know. It gave a very, it asked the hard questions and then had an interesting discussion and as a follow-up. So I'm just using that one example. I don't want to take over all of this issue with that one example, but it's the effectiveness of the training that I hear the complaints from teachers about. It's not how long is it, how short is it? It's this particular schools are going through the motions, and I know it's a resource issue, it's a time issue, it's a teacher burden issue. So there are lots of reasons schools are going through the motions. I'm not even being particularly critical. Just if we're going to spend time on this, let's think about it. Let's bring our brains to the discussion.
Yeah. Any other committee member comments?
So can I ask for some direction?
Yeah, well, that's why I was gonna go to staff now and say, what is it? How can we help you? Not to say that you're gonna give your own direction, but what is it exactly that we can discuss here that will help you out?
That'd be great. So some of it's like, there are 40 plus trainings. Are there certain ones that the board wants to be kind of taking the lead on? Do you want to do all of them? That would be helpful. And then we would need to set a priority of which ones we attend to first. Obviously, we can't make that many at once. So like being able to establish, and we could bring you, here's what we would recommend, just given the frequency, the number of educators that would be impacted by this, those kinds of things. The ethics training, as board member Lear has talked about in the past, hasn't been updated in a long time. It's a question answer kind of thing. NASDAQ has one, which is the teacher. Is it NASDAQ? Okay. I was like, I'll look into the NASB one too, but NASDAQ does have one. And so we could look at those options and how much the cost would be. There's obviously a cost to all of this. So the cost proposal is there about how much it's going to cost, 20 to 25,000 per. So if the board's like, let's do 10 this year, we're going to need like $250,000 from the board's pool of money to be able to do that work. So those are things that I think we need to consider, how much we want to invest, what we want to invest in, and then we can do the logistical pieces of that, whether Canvas is the right platform, or if we want to look at what would it be to host it on Vector. But then some of our LEAs that don't use Vector wouldn't have access to it. So it's just there's a lot of rolling pieces, but some general direction would be helpful. And then if we need to come with a request for financial support to do this, that would probably be part of the decision making, knowing there's that many trainings. Some of them are going to be shorter and sweeter, and some are going to be way longer. Like it's $1,000 per minute of video. And video is way more compelling than having to read a bunch of things sometimes, or you can say it in a 3-minute video. That's $3,000. So the cost associated with some of these, I did like an average based on the Division of Risk Management. I reached out to them because we do a lot of trainings from them at USBE, and they have some really high quality modules that I have appreciated, and got kind of cost estimates to understand how much does it cost for like the harassment training we do at USBE. And so that gave some parameters around this. And then obviously we would need to get these developed and out to the field. So just direction in any way you can of like what you would like to see done. Looks like board member Hart is excited.
We've got member Wood
Okay.
and then member Hart. And then I wanted to just ask just quickly, 40, it says being over 40 trainings required by law. So I don't know how to give direction on reducing training if.
Yeah, so the proposal I brought in December was to reduce the frequency of some of those
Okay.
trainings. So instead of annually, some would be
Right.
every 2 or every year or every 3. So that's still a decision point we probably need to make. There was 7 or 8 that I brought to say, here's an opportunity where we could lighten the frequency
That's right.
of those trainings. So that would be one way. We can make code
So
requests.
we're not suggesting to
At
eliminate.
this
We're-
point,
we're
it's
looking
just
at
the
it. Okay.
frequency, because there weren't a lot that you could say, we don't need safety, we don't need, when I went through the list, I was hoping to be like, we don't need that anymore. You were like, you do. It's just maybe the frequency that those are needed.
If I may, Chair Hymas, just as a reminder, yesterday, I don't believe you got to the reports and requirements report out. But after the December meeting, the feedback that the board gave related to wanting more clarity on a plan for how to stagger the training timeline. You may remember the proposal that came to the board, I think was like every other year. Well, that went to the Reports and Requirements Task Force last week. They discussed it and they actually made another recommendation that's a little more fleshed out. So this is about what USBE will be doing to support it with respect to modules and maybe getting a budget together for that. But actually the part about the timing, we do have an updated recommendation that the Reports and Requirements Task Force wanted the board to support yesterday, with the hope that Representative Pulsifer would include it in her bill. And the proposal is to have all the trainings, actually would be to direct the state board through board rule to establish a training, design a training schedule with the idea that educators would receive training once, at least once every 3 years. They would have a training and then have a kind of like a manual resource, like a short reminder of here's things that you were trained on, 1-2 years ago. And the idea would be to have all of the annual or every other year references and code eliminated, but then direct the board with any training to then have the board design through board rule kind of the schedule. So everybody in the state would be doing this third essentially this year, and then this third and this third. So that if an educator were to move from one LEA to the other, everybody would be on a uniform training schedule. But then at the same time, also have resources available that would be a reminder and support to LEAs to educators on the trainings that they may not be receiving that year, that they'd have like a quick guide and be able to go to. So that was maybe, I don't think it's on the schedule for today, but if there's a meeting next week or something, that reports and requirements task force, they did spend a lot of time discussing the feedback the board gave on that item. And that could be actionable ASAP, hopefully, potentially in a build this session. And then we would work on the rule after session.
Thank you. Member Wood?
So these trainings have been going on. How many of them do we at USBE actually implement or devise or create? How many of them have been pushed down to LEAs? So they're actually different from every LEA.
Yeah.
And how do we, as you look at requesting our guidance, have we talked to LEAs? Do they like that autonomy? Do they want us to take all 47 on? Like, would they be happy to say, here you go? I went through your draft. I mean, I think from looking at it, in my volunteer life of scouting, we had all these, I loved being able to go to my little login and know which ones I checked off, which ones I'd done. Oh, here's some ones. Oh, I'm having this issue with, I go and watch that one. So it seems like it would give some teacher autonomy also if we went with this. It seems like a really great use of our one-time funding that we have left over. But
Absolutely.
so anyway, kind of
yep.
that local control issue.
So there's
tell me about that.
Very few that come from USBE. Ethics is the only one that actually comes to mind. The rest have been, you're required to do this. You're on your own at the LEA level. The feedback I have received through the task force, the principal burden working group, and anyone that has talked to me about this, are like, yes, please take it on USBE. There's always but don't make it worse than what we have right now. Right? There's that great, we would love for you to do it for us, just make sure it's good. There's always that we trust you to some level, but we want to verify that trust at the end of the day. So in terms of the belief in USBE, they would love for us to take this duty on. But there are very few that we have created, and the one that I think of that we have created has been touched in over a decade at least. There you go. Over a decade. And so there is some opportunity even within what we have created to redo.
So one follow-up,
Sure.
and it goes to Molly too, so she can answer. Would this help us in some of our issues, even in what we talked about yesterday? Would us taking this on create some consistency across the state that would help us eliminate some of our problems that we're having with teachers and I'd love to hear Molly's take on it, because I love it when she puts on her principal hat.
I think it comes down to having a common curriculum, right, for teachers, that everyone's getting the same thing. And then when you see UPAC data that we're seeing upticks in a particular area, we can adjust our training, and now we've saturated the state very quickly. But you can also look at individual LEAs and be like, "Ooh, you have an uptick here. Everyone else is doing okay. What's the intervention we can provide you to improve?" But right now, when you have everyone doing their own thing, you don't have that same ability. Board Member Hart.
Yeah, so Angie said a little bit of what, Chair, am I okay? Is it my turn?
No, you're good. Sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
It is your turn. Get on there.
Angie said a little bit of what I wanted to say, connecting that reports and requirements progress with what we're talking about here. So I don't need to say that. We need this desperately, and this is the kind of thing that would really streamline the work and then make it transparent and clarify for employees. Half the problem, to Chair Hymas's point, is you're looking in 30 different places to find these trainings. You're like, oh yeah, we got to do that. Okay, log on to this site over here. And when people say log on and complete a form, whatever, that takes time. That's not easy. Like, that's not as quick as, pouring a drink or something. The other thing is to Director Johnson, sorry, I always
Yeah, that's correct.
the trust and verify is 1,000% and well said. There also needs to be an escape hatch, like, oh, this doesn't work for me for whatever reason. Like there's an uptick, or you've got a particularly a situation that happened and now people are feeling unmoored about whether or not they're prepared for something. I also need it to, as in an administrative role, when I identify an issue with a teacher or a staff member, and I need to get corrective action in there on a very base level so that it doesn't turn into something huge and horrible. And I can say, I direct you to review this training, even outside of that, 1, 2, 3 year progression. I need those tools to be able to easily, say, hey, some of those judgment calls maybe went in a direction they shouldn't. Review this and let's talk about it. That's just part of directing and guiding and helping small things get fixed at a small level rather than turning big. I'm wondering, and I know we delay a lot of things, but this kind of issue needs the attention of practitioners to design. It's too complex to do just among board members, or at least that's how I feel. Do we still have the working group of educators convened? Didn't we have a working group of principals and other various leaders, Director Thompson?
So we have the principal burden working group is what we call it. They are still convening as necessary. And they could be a group that could be a stakeholder feedback group, or we could convene educators to help design these. That's the part where give us direction on how you'd like to see it. Or we could have a contractor do the design and then have to take it to a user group to give us feedback to refine the design. There's different ways, obviously.
Yeah. I'm particularly interested in a user group made up of users at multiple levels. I'm interested in feedback from even our board, our LEA boards, as we ask them and put the spotlight on them a little bit, saying, this is your responsibility, and we're talking about greater accountability and clear lines of authority. Local boards need to have faith in this whatever we do in this space. They're their employees. Teachers are not our employees. And so
But we license.
Did you lose me? Hello?
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I just want to make the point that the people that are most affected by teachers not being trained effectively is, of course, students. And so by extension, their families, because, that. But really and truly, it's the LEA, because that's who the employment contract is with. That's who supervises teachers and practitioners. So in this case, we need their feedback more than ever, and they need to be comfortable with the direction in which we're moving. So I don't know what that looks like, but we need some sort of working group before we go and spend any money on a contractor making a system or spend any time, which is money, on going through Canvas. Of course, I think we should use the tools that we have and people are comfortable with, because I can log on to something like Canvas instantaneously. Like, that's an automatic process for me. I also happen to have experience with Vector. And what I like about the whole fact that they charge by the minute is that is an incentive to keep them as short as possible and not fluffy. But I really feel like the people most affected by this, local boards, principals, and teachers. And I'm not willing to go too much further without getting some feedback from them. That's my opinion.
So can I ask a follow-up? Would that be okay?
Yes,
Chair?
thank you, Member Hart.
So for this one, with that working group, what I'm hearing, so I want to throw it back to you to make sure I'm listening attentively. Feedback may be up front from a working group with mixed representation. School, local boards, members, principals, and teachers saying, what would you want included in this? Or here's what we're thinking of what we would include. What are we missing? What would you take out? And then actually developing the module, and then maybe coming back to that group to say, did we achieve what you thought we needed to achieve, and get feedback to refine it before we, call it good. Would that meet what you're kind of thinking?
That's at least what I'm talking about to, that's what I'm proposing to the committee in a very soft proposal. Also to take what the Reports and Requirements Task Force, the work that they've done that we really have heard about, but we haven't, heard it formally and the whole board. We need to take that and work that feedback into whatever we take to a working group. I think Deputy Stallings, are you trying to make a recommendation out of this?
Well, if I may,
I see you.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, there's two ways you could go with this. We could give feedback to Jennifer and she could just start working on it, because direction to staff doesn't necessarily have to be approved by the board if you wanted her to start working right away. But we could make an official recommendation that the board approves, which means Jennifer won't start working on that for at least a month, but it'll probably take a while, a lot of this work. I'm just trying to think through what should be informal direction to staff that Jennifer starts and team and others work on versus an official recommendation like the board. So if you could help me, I don't know, Jennifer, do you have a preference?
Yeah, so if we lean towards favoring the proposal from the reducing burden, even though we haven't heard that full proposal, that gives me prioritization. If we set a 3-year calendar, we're obviously going to pick the trainings that are going to come up first. We'll get those done. So it just depends. Do you want all of the trainings done at USB? If yes, great. Happy to do all 40 plus. But it will take us a few years. I'm not going to promise that all of this will get out next year. Just to get that kind of quantity and do it well, I think we can get in advance to try and get it so that the 3 years we have all the trainings needed in that 3-year cycle by the 3rd year. So is that the desire of the committee?
I know Member Lear wanted to, I don't know if it's a yes and or a no but to your proposal,
Yes,
but
and.
let's hear from Member Lear.
And so I did have some, as Molly was talking, as you were talking, these are just suggestions for some direction. And if anybody wants to amend these or correct these, I'm great with that. But let me start with saying, I think this is an area where the USBE can be a leader. I've always said we should be more of a resource and at least as much of a resource as we are a monitor. So I like the idea of developing trainings. When you said it kind of broke my heart when you said we really don't provide many trainings. And I think that is unfortunate because we can provide them. We can have 160 LEAs. That's a good use of our money. That's my intro. Here's my suggestion. I like the idea of staff deciding or giving us some recommendations. These are the areas where audits or informal auditing or monitoring has led us to believe there are the most problems. We don't think there are any problems with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Is not a required training by I use that one as an example.
No, we keep coming back to that, but I would like to have staff give us a suggestion. I would suggest starting with some manageable number. I kind of guessed at 15-ish, and I don't know if that's manageable, but start with that in terms of a number. And then I absolutely really like Molly's idea of the user group. If you could get a group of people that would stay committed for a few years so that we'd have some consistency. I know that there was a UPAC task force. I'm kind of going back to what I know, but that was, I thought, very effective in hammering out some issues and solving some problems and sometimes painfully. But so I know that was one group that was effective for that. And I also have to say, in response to the concerns about LEAs employ teachers, but USBE licenses teachers. So we do have a really strong vested interest in, I think, training, especially in that area. So the ideas that I would have is the user group, maybe 15, and then staff recommendations to begin. We're going to start with these trainings.
Okay.
Those would be the 3 ideas I had to give staff some direction and I would love that if the direction could get her started. And I know it's you and your people, but to get you started as soon as possible, because I was really inspired by the research projects that were recommended. I mean, that took a lot of thought that were recommended yesterday. And if the rest of us could do what Jenny did, what Jim did, and come up with some ideas that could also enrich this particular these recommendations to do some studies with one-time money or discretionary money. So that's a little bit of an aside, but that could bring us more information for you. So I don't know if the rest of you like those proposals and want to add to them.
Is that,
I think the only thing I need is, are you willing to give money to do this?
that's what we need to ask the question, right? Does this come from teaching and learning? Does teaching and learning have the money? Do we need to?
I would prefer not. We've got other projects we had planned.
Of course you would prefer
But
not.
you as a board get to tell me.
Molly's got her hand waving and then member Lear.
I know, I was just going to ask the same.
Go ahead, Molly.
One of the things that I'm wondering if there's 2 issues here. It doesn't have to be, it just occurred to me. I'm wondering if we're talking about a framework or a platform, not a framework, a platform for trainings, like a USB providing a resource in, organizing a training platform, either using something like Vector or Canvas. So there's a one-stop shop. And then the other issue is the actual trainings and their frequency and what they're made of and that kind of thing. I just, in my mind, I think we might actually have 2 separate, or that might make the work easier, or it might identify who needs to be included as stakeholders. That's just a thought I had. I do plan after the meeting sometime soon to try to put together a proposal to similar to the research projects that were proposed. I too echo what Carol says, and I was particularly impressed with the level of thought, and I need to raise my game in that area. I think that this would be a perfect place for us to do to put some of those funds towards developing this resource for LEAs. And you're absolutely right, Carol. We license teachers, but that tension between we need to provide support for our LEA boards to be able to make the best decisions they can and support them in their employment of educators. So I plan, for what it's worth, I plan to look into writing up some sort of proposal that we bring forward. But the point is, I don't think this work should wait for that. I think that we can do some of this identification with an identified working group. My only request is that it, at a minimum, include LEA board representation, school administrators of both our smaller type schools and our larger type LEAs. So across the charter LEA continuum, and principals, well, I already said principals, right? And teachers. Hopefully across the political spectrum, so that we get multiple viewpoints. That's my kind of my minimum. I know you're looking for clear guidance. I'm trying to be clear. That's what I proposed to the committee. Change whatever. I'm just spitballing.
Well, I'm wondering if we need to say teachers, I hate to just use the broad term of educators. I'm just saying I've seen many times where the counselor trains the teachers on like suicide prevention or bullying. So
I think it's a great idea
So-
to include counselors.
yeah, well, I wonder if we just say principals, educators. I don't know if that, if that consists of counselors, because counselors need to be involved, of course.
Yeah, like some of them, you're going to have school nurses for like the diabetes. Like
yes.
I think the relevant stakeholders, but anyone who's going to actually be impacted by it is kind of what I'm hearing. So local board, principals, and teachers, we can definitely have on. But I would also need to pull in the relevant educators to that work.
Maybe we need some blended working groups.
Yeah, and it may not be the same group for all of them, but a core group of them that can be maybe in all of them, so that there is that consistency and like, this is how we do things kind of feel in the space. So it's not redoing it 15 times over the next couple of years.
And Molly made another really good point when she said there are several pieces to this, and I didn't mention in the 3 things I recommended. I think it would be helpful. You folks are in a better position to suggest a platform. So I think having a platform, and maybe USBH, and it's the Costco model versus the Saks Fifth Avenue model where you recommend one platform. USB provides training on Vector, and I'm making that up. Maybe Canvas is better. I don't know.
Canvas is just free. So Vector, the LEAs, we either as a state, we need to pay like $30,000 for people to have access to
That
it.
much better?
Or,
than-
yeah, I'll do some more work with Vector and have a better idea for that as board member Hart
But-
brings the
But she
financial
makes a good
part.
point to say,
We need a
want
platform.
Recommendation
Yeah.
from you about platform.
Yeah.
I think one
I agree with that.
platform would make it more cost effective,
Mhm.
and then LEAs can adapt or choose not to use it because it's not in their preferred platform, or they can take the content and put it into their platform.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest that, but a platform recommendation from you.
Okay.
And then I think the other piece that maybe Molly missed, she said another thing that I can't remember, but that content is what USBE can develop
Mhm.
effectively. So there's those recommendations
Okay.
also.
And can you move forward on this initial part without the funding plan in place?
Yeah, I can get some of it going. Ultimately, it's going to come down to when we need to actually like film the video portion. That part
Yeah,
starts to have
content,
money.
of course.
but
Content
The
and
initial
platform.
part, like I can get people together. That's free.
But, and it's unfortunate that there's some talented people like David Slay, darn it.
I know. We can contract with David.
Yeah.
He'd be happy
this-
to do work. He is.
That we could, I hope we can find some people.
I can make training entertaining.
Right. And he was good at making it short enough.
Yep. He was.
So I think that, but Molly's point about platform and the recommendation,
My initial recommendation is
Yes.
Canvas, just because it's free. Everyone in the state has access to it. But I don't know enough about what it would take to have everyone have access to Vector, but it would require another system that people have to learn. And that's always my hesitation, where everyone at this point knows Canvas to some level. My initial recommendation was Canvas. And then I was like, oh, a lot of people are using Vector, but there's nothing that prevents the LEA from uploading that training into Vector. So my initial heart is Canvas just because there's not a barrier. I'll dig in with Vector a little
Yeah.
more on that.
I just want to clarify, the USBE, we are providing these trainings, but LEAs still have the flexibility to say, you know what, we're going to do it the way we.
Well, I think that's
done.
a piece for the board as well. What I'm hearing is we're going to make them available, and if people want to leverage them, awesome, but we're not requiring them to have to use our modules. Is that accurate?
That's,
Okay.
yes, that's accurate. Remember, Hart, your hand is still up. I don't know if you had another thought that you wanted. Okay.
No, although, you know, I did, when you were saying, making it entertaining, we really could make it we could see if our partners like SpyHop or somebody could help us. Some of our university partners or student groups are doing this better than we are. Our kids are doing this better than we are. We need to tap into that. So just a thought.
And what about updating? So I was approached, actually, it was just on Wednesday. One of my directors came to me and said, hey, we want to use this training. We pulled it off of, I don't want to call anybody out, but a website. Well, I will. UEN, update your stuff. It was on addiction, and gaming was one of them. And they had kids that looked like me in high school with controllers that were corded, and they had flip phones and giant, you remember those big screen monitors, right? And I told them, we can't use that. The kids are not going to relate to that at all, right? It's going to be meaningless. So I know it's about money, right? But we've got to make sure these are relevant. Yes.
It's an ongoing cost. And we never, when we're assigned training in code, I don't know that we are good about saying you need to give us money to do that training. And it needs to be annual money. It needs to be every 5-10 years where like people's outfits have changed. We just want people, like my daughter went through the financial literacy course and some of those videos are from the 80s. And I was like, I'm sorry, child, this is what we were. We're different today. It's like, I totally get where you're coming from. That is the part that I think the burden from the board, when we talk logistics, there will be an ongoing burden. And it will come in a cycle. And maybe that's what we just need to plan for, is that cycle.
Say something. You know, we didn't discuss this in the reports and requirements task force, but I think a proposal potentially could include some sort of a funding request that the legislature do provide an amount of money to USBE. If this ends up working out, it may not be this session, maybe it's next session, because potentially the board could start down the road with some carry forward funds to see, again, if LEAs really want this and try it with one or two. And then maybe we could get an ongoing appropriation, especially if again, this legislation passes to direct us or the board to do a 3-year design on training, to come with a proposal for maybe the 2025 session for an ongoing plan for like the 15 core, something like that. So that we did, and board member Larry, you'll remember the UPAC task force from about 4 or 5 years ago. They made a recommendation for some ongoing funding for UPAC related training, and that didn't end up going anywhere. But so this is not, I just wanted to share, this is actually not it's come up quite a few times to get some resources for quality training, and
It would
maybe
be a
this is
large
the time
amount,
for an
but it's
ongoing,
It is an ongoing demand.
Yeah, so I guess that's the task that we have here, is to create something that's worth updating.
Yeah. That gets
So-
used enough to do.
So
We could also, on the platform, have a place where districts could possibly upload the trainings they have, and maybe we could crowdsource, like leave that in, still do what we're doing, but they could upload their trainings so that there's still one place that they could direct their employees to go to, but it has their training there. And then other LEAs or schools might be able to review those trainings and choose to use them. That's one way to keep it fresh and crowdsource great materials that other districts are using. Just an idea.
It is, I mean, it's a good idea, and I don't want to speak too much on it. I do worry about overpopulating our minds, right? Of saying, okay, well, here's 6 trainings on, you know,
Oh, no,
Pledge of Allegiance. We'll bring that back, right?
Like over
Yeah,
Choose-
no,
choose-
LEA
yes.
leaders would be able to
Oh,
see
okay.
those and then
And-
choose.
Like a little library.
And I worry about a USBE website that has trainings that are varying accuracies and I don't want to have to review everyone and say, yes, the training from XYZ district or ABC charter is not particularly accurate or needs
But
to be
would-
changed.
But
in
do
those
you want to
ways.
find that out after we have a train wreck?
No,
At some level.
but on the other hand, that's my hesitation about crowdsourcing is that if you post it on the USB website, there's some implicit or
Right,
explicit
Approval.
Understand.
that
Yeah,
we. these are
perception of
accurate,
approval.
These are updated, these
Yeah.
are, so there's some challenge, but that's what I want staff to explore. This is not our job.
Exactly.
Director Thronson, do you feel like you have enough guidance, or would you like more?
No, I think that was a perfect start. I've got
Okay.
15 modules we want, which ones we want to do first. I think some of that goes to the 3-year planning, but I'll just keep that in mind. If that is a potential, we honestly probably need a 5-year calendar because some like educator training or ethics training is when you get your license renewed, which is every 3 if you're associate, 5 if you're a professional. It gets a little messy, but
And that,
Yeah.
based on that stuff that you have more knowledge about.
well, and I'll start playing with that calendar and just to see what layers come from that recommendation to try and be proactive with how about and bring you any iterations to that. But I'm excited. I appreciate the clarity of direction and purpose. And I really do think, going back to the comments around, we should be a resource that you were speaking to, Board Member Lear. That's, I think, a big portion of USBE is to be that. And since everyone has to do this, why are we making 168 LEAs make these trainings when we could crowdsource it ourselves and make it one, and they can tweak it, they can adapt it, they can add more content if they want to, they can not use it. And that is always a welcomed resource from USBE when you're not like, you have to use this. It's just a tool that is available. So I appreciate the direction. I think I have enough to, especially if someone's going to do the funding proposal, I will come back to you if I need to. But at this point, this is great direction to go from.
Thank you. Do we need a motion on this?
The motion's great. I think it just solidifies like what our next steps are. So I'll identify that list. That's probably what I would bring back to this committee is here's the recommendations. What feedback do you have? Who did we talk to confirm those recommendations so they're not just Jennifer's recommendations? So that's the part I would intend to bring back to you all. And then it sounds like Board Member Hart is signing up for the funding proposal piece to the board. So
So,
I don't know if you give her a motion, but
well, so for this motion, I'm going to look to Member Hart or Member Lear to make sure, because you guys really did a lot of the lift here. I want to make sure that this, well, I'll use different word. But I just want to make sure that this captures what you were seeing. I believe the committee agrees with you, with both of you. Is this motion put together in a manner that either one of you would make it?
I would be happy to. Carol, go for it. I think it's accurate as long as it gives, as long as our committee is in agreement that this is very fluid and we need to let staff do their thing in problem solving this.
Agreed. The one piece I'd add to it is to identify a user group. I don't know, user group, so identify a consulting group or a group of practitioners, as we've discussed, that maybe can be, as you said,
the
that
core
can
group.
maybe be relevant, that can be fluid, that can address different training possibilities. But I think that's really important. If you can get a consistent group of people who are willing to
spend time with me.
Yes, and I think it would be really fun if I were a person in the field. I think it would be
Some
super interesting.
people will think this is fun.
Yeah. I don't know
I'll
why I
find them.
think it is, but it does sound kind of interesting. to me. Yeah. So yes, I think that's another piece that to add to that. But other than that, okay, so I'll make the motion.
Could we
to
also
convene-
add in, I know she mentioned it,
sorry.
but just so that it is on in our, that we're acknowledging that when you're identifying the list, whatever's passed, when we get to that, reports and requirement timing, just because I don't see that on there. Just using that as another reference in number 2,
Like a timeline, I mean.
the timeline, yes.
Can you repeat that again? Is what you're trying to say is to bring the information back at about the time that we might be doing
Well,
this?
so we've got this requirement and task force timing, just using that as an additional reference.
So I
Because in
think-
there it says identify a list informed by audit recommendations, LEA recommendation based on user feedback. And I just wanted to add in that also as another reference point.
I think that's
Oh, yes.
exactly where it
That's a
needs to
great
go.
idea.
And yes, a very good place right there in number 2.
So you want me to read that or do we or what do you want to do, Matt, as a motion?
If we're ready, then go ahead.
I just have one addition.
Oh. You've done mine. Okay.
Yep. And that would be a number 5, that there's an articulation of the data points outlining why this path is, I don't want to say needed, but being considered. Like, what failures do we have in our current system, not generally, but specifically, that warrants the infusion of time, resources, funding? Thank you.
And I just wondered if that in terms of, that seems really logical and that's something that you think you can provide to us?
I've asked Ben for categories from what UPAC referrals are to help that was a question that came up last time, but because of the holidays, that hasn't been achieved. So I'll go back to Ben and say, what are the areas we are seeing more numerous violations? And that might help us to prioritize. Others, I think, other data points are the number of educators that are impacted by that particular training. So some of them are going to be like 12 people or maybe, 2,000 versus 30,000 educators. And that might also help us to prioritize. If we're going to spend our resources, let's spend them in ways that hit the most number of people.
Are those the data
Are those
points
data points that work?
you're looking for, member Karen? Okay.
Is
So,
this,
It's kind of like showing, I think it would be kind of like showing your work.
Well,
if
I'm
she
just
makes
wondering-
these recommendations.
I'm wondering the direction of this because the reasons why statewide training support is needed. I mean, obviously the trainings are required. So
But there's 47 required, so why did she choose the 15 she chose?
That's-
oh, I see. That's okay.
Like, why?
Is that what-
How do we choose the priorities that
I
we're
don't want to put
recommending?
words in his mouth. Maybe that's not.
No, well, he gave me the nod. We're good. So member
Well,
Hart, go ahead.
and that is something that would be inherent in writing a proposal, a financial proposal. So please, Director Thomson, let's work together on that. I think
Okay.
I don't see it just as the 15. That's a piece of it, but
That's beginning.
that there's a lot more to that, and it belongs in that proposal.
Okay.
And
Member Lear, go ahead.
And I hope that it goes without saying that you'll build in Molly, and I'm happy to help you too. I'm not great with money, but I'll try. This matters a lot. So I hope that builds in the ongoing cost too.
And that's why it's
Okay.
important that we work with the reports and requirements task force, because that's our already existing connection to our major funding source.
Okay. Now do you want me to read that or make the motion?
And I'm going to stop. This is a large motion that I don't want to reread. So we're going to read it once. Is there any other discussion because it's up here on the board? Unless Vice Chair Carey wants to do some of the work. Okay. So with no more discussion, Member Lear, will you read the motion?
I move that the committee directs staff to identify a user group to work within the items below, including local board members, principals, relevant educators, district and charter representatives, Number 2, identify a list of training priorities informed by audit recommendations, the reports and requirements task force recommendations, and the LEA recommendations based on user group feedback for up to, can I amend this to say, or on the fly to say, for approximately 15 training requirements, USBE could develop state level modules for LEA use. Number 3, develop a funding proposal, including working with finance staff to identify potential funding, one-time and ongoing sources to support the creation, and again, an audible and maintenance of state level training modules to be uploaded to an identified format or platform for LEA use. And then, so I changed that a little
Instead
bit
of
to
Canvas.
uploaded to an identified platform.
I wondered if you want to keep Canvas.
No, you're right. It'll be too complicated. Canvas, start with Canvas. Sorry, I'm sorry. Good point. I'll reread that. Number 3, develop a funding proposal, including working with finance staff to identify potential funding, one-time and ongoing sources to support the creation and maintenance of state level training modules to be uploaded to Canvas for LEA use, or a Canvas, I'm not sure.
Yeah, just Canvas.
Canvas. And then number 4, bring information back to the committee in a future meeting
Should be last, but-
and identify the reasons why state level training support is needed, including audit findings, costs, and administrative burden efficiencies for LEAs and UPAC complaints.
Should we just switch form?
Yes, and did we get your timing? Did you get your timing element in there adequately, Leanne?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's the motion.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Lear has put a motion before the committee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I believe that passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Thronson. We are moving on to agenda item 1.9, R277-406, Early Learning Program and Benchmark Assessments.
Ben is back.
Ben is back. Okay, Ben, please.
Thank you, Chair Hymas. So there's a few different amendments that are being proposed to R277-406 related to the Science of Reading program that have come from feedback from the field and from the legislator that sponsored this program. The first change we have is on line 79. Angie, if you want to go to that, there was feedback that would be helpful to have a definition for what reading on grade level looked like for lower grade students. You heard public comment to this at the beginning of the meeting, and this is the level that staff are proposing the board put in the rule for that. So that's the first proposed amendment. As you scroll down, the next change is a proposal to change the target percentage of students meeting reading targets, and that's on line 186. Proposal to up that from 60% to 65% beginning in the 2024 2025 school year. I think the goal is to eventually move that up to 70%. And then the final big change starts on line 200, and that deals with the LEAs that are not meeting the curriculum requirements that are established by statute. This is something that's required in code that LEAs use particular curriculum as required, and so we've identified a process to work with these LEAs to get curriculum that meets the statutory requirement. We have staff here that can answer your questions about the proposal, the reason for the different definitions and targets, and answer your questions about the rule.
Thank you, Ben. Can I ask Sarah, is she here? I asked her a question in our preparation meeting for this committee meeting today. If she could explain to the committee, because hopefully we saw the email that was sent to us from Brooke regarding her comments again from public comment. Can you help us understand if we're looking at lines, what did you say, Ben, 80 something, 79 to
Yeah,
83?
The definition. There you go.
My question, and I invite Sarah to help the committee understand as well, and then we can have a discussion on this is why 750? Is it too high? It's, obviously reported that it is. Is this a change from what the state of Utah has done? When, I didn't ask this, but when was it changed? When did we put it at 750? And what would be the benefit of keeping it versus moving it?
Right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Sarah Wibke, Literacy and Early Learning Coordinator. So happy to be here for you today and answer your questions. As far as where did the 750 Lexile come from? This started back in 2018, 2019, when we did a predictive study. And during that time, we looked at 3 years of data just for Utah students, and really looking at what is the predictability for RISE. And when I say for RISE, I mean specifically the English language arts side, and specifically proficiency. Obviously, because of the data at that time, some of it was SAGE, which is the name of our assessment prior to RISE, for everyone. And when thinking about that, at the time, looking at our student data, the recommendation that came out of that study was that reading on grade level, a good cut score for that, based on that predictability, would be the 750 Lexile. The Lexiles come from our Acadience reading assessment. And so the correlation between Acadience reading and RISE is a 0.76. In previous years, it has moved anywhere between a 0.73 and a 0.76. So it's been a strong correlation for quite some time. In addition to that, after 2019, during 2019, the school report cards came out. And so at that time, ROGO was defined in the Accountability Tech Manual. And we recognize that that maybe isn't the best place for it to be as far as transparency and clarity. And so the request was to really think about, why don't we move that to board rule? And so we've had this 750 Lexile cut score since 2019. In addition to the first study, a second study was done actually just last year. The outcomes of that study recommended a Lexile cut score of a 755, which is just slightly higher than this. So fairly similar in comparison, which would include our data then after COVID as well. So we have our pre-COVID and after COVID coming in with about the same number. And so as far as a recommendation, and thinking about that when the study came out, we also looked at our standards. So currently in our standards, the Lexile band for second and third grade combined is 450 to 790, meaning 450 would be like the beginning of year second grade expectation, and that 790 would be end of year third grade. So this 750 falls a little bit below that 790 as well. If you look at Lexile.com, which is sort of the national, Lexile bank, and it's run by Metametrics, who does these types of studies. Their beginning of year third grade expectation, and again, if this is beginning of year, is a 520 Lexile. Their end of year is an 820 Lexile. So we are quite a bit below that. And then their fourth grade beginning of year Lexile is 740, which means our students would also be right on target for beginning fourth grade, which is, putting them up and being ready for success within that space as well. So a lot of things were taken into consideration. And when we look at the whole state overall, and we look at our overall RISE ELA proficiency, which is for third grade 46%, and our overall ROGO, our reading on grade level proficiency, it's at 48. So you can see that's really very similar in percentiles and looking at proficiency and reading on grade level within our schools and our students. So I hope that kind of helps to answer your question around where it came from, why it's there, and sort of how it connects with all of the other pieces of our system.
Thank you, Sarah, for that explanation. Any questions from the committee? And obviously this is just one portion of the rule here. So we'll start with Member Hart.
Actually, that's a very good point. Why don't we continue going through the changes, and I just have some more general questions that might be more appropriate to the end or might be answered along the way. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, or I know Ben kind of pointed out where the changes were. Sarah, do you want to speak more to what the changes are? And I believe,
Yes,
remind me of the
certainly.
line numbers. It's like
Let me.
The next
I mean,
change
180
was-
Line number.
Go ahead, Ben.
187 is the next change. That's the target percentage for students at grade level. We're making better progress.
Sarah, do you want to speak to that before we
Sure,
move on?
absolutely.
Is that okay, Member Hart, if we just do it that
That's
way?
exactly what I'm,
Okay.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not exactly, I need to understand completely why these numbers were put in here and the background of it. I also think the questions I've received have to do with rationale and where did these come from and whether they're arbitrary, capricious, which I understand they're not. But that needs to be, we need to talk about that. So that, because I have serious concerns on how this is going to land with our constituents, quite frankly, our practitioners. So just understanding the background will help enormously, and I think it needs to be on the public record.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So when we're thinking about line 187, that change moving from 60% to a 65% goal beginning for, the next school year, that literacy target percentage is our growth goal. So it's looking at grades 1 through 3 combined and what percentage of them are making typical or better progress from their beginning of year to their end of year. And so with that being said, we've been at 60% for several years. And then we were potentially talking about increasing it based on our data and our outcomes. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So we went ahead and shifted away from that. So in looking at our most recent, few years of data, our state hovers around 68, 69% as far as this specific data set, grades 1 through 3, and growth from beginning to end of year. So we're well above the 65% as far as setting the target goal, and definitely significantly above the 60%, which is what the goal is at this time. So with that being said, the shift to 65 was really looking at what has our data looked like for the last 3 years. In addition to that, we went to our stakeholder group, which is the literacy directors from all of the districts and charters, and said, hey, we're thinking about, I of course explained all of the data to them too and showed them, where we've been at the last few years and just said, how do you feel about moving to 65%? 100% of them that chimed in the poll were on. They were excited. A lot of them gave feedback in the chat box around, let's do this. We're making amazing changes and increases in literacy. Let's do this together. And they were excited. I haven't had any feedback at this time, at least to myself or my team, around feeling like this should be too high or we don't want to change it or anything. So I haven't heard any of that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but just wanted to sort of give you the rundown of where it came from and what we're looking like today.
Member Wood, you have a question?
Yeah, if we're at 68, 69, why would we put a goal that's lower than where we are?
That's a really great question. When we're thinking about looking at that, we also wanted to be mindful of this goal specifically means if it isn't met, then a district or charter falls into what we call the system of support, which means they get special support to ensure, and it is differentiated based on the LEA, based on their needs and their data. And so we wanted to look at if we shifted it all the way up to like 69, for example, what would that look like? How many LEAs would fall into that system of support? And would the current team and the capacity of the team be able to support all of them as well as they deserve? And really, if it were at 69, that would not be, we wouldn't feel like the capacity was there to really give them the support that they would need. 65 is a much more feasible spot where we would be able to support everyone that would need it.
So you're saying because that's an average, we have enough that are below
Correct.
that we can't elevate that yet.
Yes,
And
and we
if
want to
you
make
can-
sure people are supported.
So if you can
and-
bump enough of those up
Yes.
eventually, and isn't there a goal in SB 127 where in the next 2 or 3 years, we're supposed to be at 70 anyway? And maybe
Yes,
those are
that's a
different.
different, yes,
different-
that's a
okay.
different set of data. That would
Okay.
be the reading on grade level that we just talked about moments ago
Got it.
would be at
Okay.
70. But yes, you're right. It is still part of that. If we have kids growing, certainly that outcome is going to increase as well.
Thank you. Any other questions on this change before we go to the next change, and anything in between before we go to the next change? I guess it's only a few lines down. Seeing none, let's talk about lines 200 and through, looks like 200 through 214.
So this is going to be the process then that staff would follow if LEAs are not using curriculum that meets the statutory requirements. So this is something that's mandated by statute. If you look in 53G 10-306, it requires LEAs to use specific curriculum, and so this is targeted at ensuring compliance with that statute. And then just kind of spells out the details of what steps would be taken if LEAs are not in compliance.
Thank you, Ben. And this one I struggle with because we don't typically assign curriculum. Is that right?
Yes.
So here we're saying we're not telling you exactly what curriculum to use, but we're saying here's a list of approved curriculum put together. Sorry, I had kind of a east and west head shake and a north and south one. Director Thronson, I'm going to ask you to come up and help us, because we want to understand here, right? So
Right.
it was my understanding that there was kind of an approved list that LEAs could choose from, but is there more on that?
Yeah, so there's a list, but it's not a comprehensive list. So LEAs can also, we only get materials that publishers send us. So not all publishers have submitted, some for various reasons, like some are coming this spring. Well, they're not on the list yet, but an LEA might want to adopt them. So what we did with the panel was create a science of reading checklist for curriculum that LEAs can use to whatever curriculum they have or want to potentially purchase and can do it themselves. We offer the service of creating our list of the ones we've reviewed, but that list is not the only list. That is just the ones we know that we can guarantee to an LEA, you're good, but they can do their own work at the local LEA. So for example, Wit and Wisdom is one that Jordan is looking at, and we haven't reviewed it. It's coming in the spring review. They need to know sooner than the spring review is happening. So they're doing their own review with the checklist that we use. So we have a list, as I think that's why Sarah's head probably went yes, but it's not the list. It is a list that we know is qualified to meet the eligibility of those requirements, but is not every curriculum out there that could potentially qualify. Does that help clarify?
That does help clarify. I guess one of the concerns that I have, I don't know if it's a concern, but you have different LEAs who could use the same curriculum, different schools within the LEA who could use the same curriculum and get different results, right? You have different charters who have different models, right, who would get different results. So how do we say this works, right? Because realistically, maybe it doesn't. There are so many factors at play here, right? So how do we say, yeah, choose from this list and
Like you're not guaranteed results because you chose from that list, but you are guaranteed to have materials that are aligned to the science and not relying on materials that are against or not in line with the science. So you're giving a guarantee of a viable curriculum that says these materials are aligned to the research. They indicate the best practices we know about reading. And now at least a teacher is given materials instead of what most of our teachers rely on, Pinterest and Teachers Pay Teachers, that have been validated, that are research-based and are relying on those, but the teacher moves are the critical piece. Sarah and I do not believe that just changing your curriculum is going to be the guarantee that your outcomes change. The teacher has to use those materials wisely. All of the materials have way too much content in them. You have to know when kids need more repetition, when they can handle less repetition. What part do you not even need to ever look at in your core program? And those are the professional judgments that come into curriculum and why we get variability. I can say everyone should have this curriculum and we are going to get varying results because teachers are the the variable with those materials. But if we have poor materials and teachers are using those poor materials, can guarantee those poor results versus if we have good materials, we now have at least a higher chance that we are going to have better results with those materials. It's not guaranteed. And we would never say curriculum is the only thing. Teachers have to be the mover.
Well, and teachers, and again, the,
Kids.
well, of
Parents.
course, the kids. But I'm thinking the model, the structure, the culture of the environment, right? Where you have, I know I mentioned this before. I walked into a classroom at my son's high school, and it was set up with like, it wasn't desks and chair. It was like furniture. And I'm looking around like, for me, I couldn't learn in this, right? And then we have this science of reading, and we've been going to these trainings as teachers have been going and principals have been going. And it's like, okay, are we now telling you how to teach this? And does it fit the model that they've have in their charter or traditional LEA? And are we trying to change that as well? I'm trying to find the reaches of the law saying, and I get it, and I'm actually very excited that the USB is taking this on. This is a side note. I've been pushing academics for a long time, and this is one of those pushes. So I'm very excited to see this. However, there's always dominoes, right? And so are we now overreaching saying, yeah, of course we want to increase reading across the state, especially in our early literacy, right? Early learning. So I'm happy to see this, but are we doing too much now by going in and saying, well, you're not at the numbers we like. We're not even at the numbers that we like, quite frankly. But you're going to use this because we believe it's going to get you there. Instead of just saying, well, this is what we recommend. If you can keep up with us, great. Use what you want to use. If we see you falling behind, almost like what is it? Not CSI. That's a crime thing. Anyway.
Springboard.
Right. Springboard. Right. Almost like that, where we see them falling behind and we say, you know what? We gave you the opportunity. It's not working. But I think we're a little premature in saying you have to do this. Can you help us through that?
I mean, historically, we've not had a curriculum requirement. And so we've gotten the results we have right now, right? We've not told people you need science of reading materials. We're just like, you do your thing. And we're at 48%. So I think we've done that. And I think it's that time where the law requires us to do this. So in terms of our authority your authority as a board, it's more how do you want to support LEAs in achieving that requirement? But I do see it as there is flexibility. We're not saying there's a one size fits all. The curriculum list is small because the science of reading has not been well implemented in publishing. But Sarah just met with a publisher this week that said we will change our program in these ways, and now they'll be eligible. And that's what we've had a couple of vendors do that. And that's exciting because they are realizing states are not going to just take the sticker that they put on it that says aligned to the Common Core in the old days, aligned to the science of reading now, right? A lot of programs are like, we align, and the sticker is not necessarily accurate. So it's been actually a really powerful conversations to see publishers go, yeah, we could make those adjustments. And then we had one get added to the list because they took the time, they changed their whole program to meet the science of reading. And I think that is a power level that the board has through staff to be able to have those conversations with publishers to get better materials, to allow teachers to have the what of teaching so they can bring the how you teach to the conversation. So it's a balance. I understand like from a local control state, but we are not saying this is your only list. Some states across the country, Arkansas, they have a list. You have to pick what's on that list. We're just saying, here's the criteria we want you to use. And as you're going out and looking at what you want, does it meet those criteria? And the criteria is not 100%. Some of them are 80% threshold, some are 90. There's some flexibility even within expectations. So not everything is like, yeah, it's black and white. There is some gray in this work too.
Okay, we have Vice Chair Carey and Member Hart in that order. And before, I'm going to ask some questions just to no response needed yet. We'll get there. And I don't want to completely dominate, but curriculum is expensive. I'm guessing that we're not helping out in that area. And then timeline as well. So we can circle back to those, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'd like to just talk about that for a second as well. What kind of burden are we putting on our LEAs? It's hard to change curriculum. It's very difficult. It is a long process, and results don't show up the first year in all cases. Right. So anyway, with that, Vice Chair Carey, please.
Yeah. So did we add this to backup? I know that you sent it to me, the draft of Utah's literacy curriculum list and the science of reading curriculum. I'd asked that they be added to backup. Were they?
If I may, the request made was to email it out to everyone. So Kelsey did do that. My apologies for not knowing what day Kelsey did that. Maybe Wednesday? Okay, thank you. I think it was, yesterday.
So I appreciate that, but let me be clear. The request was that it be added to backup, but that it also be emailed because of the timing. And that sometimes, given the timing and the short turnaround, I wanted to make sure that everyone on this subcommittee was aware of it. So was it added to backup? Okay.
But everyone in the committee was emailed it, correct?
The entire board, actually.
Okay, so Board Member Carey, everyone on this committee does have access to it. We can definitely pull it up. They're on our website, so it's not things that are hard to find if we need Angie to pull them.
Yeah.
But this committee did get those documents.
Yeah, I have the email.
Okay.
Just make sure they get into backup.
We can do that.
Thank you. It says that this is a draft. When was this drafted? How long has this been around?
Yes. So when originally when the bill came out 2022, obviously March of 2022, LEAs, we were of course sharing clarity within our LEAs around, dear literacy directors, this is how this bill affects you, all of these different components, one of them being curriculum. And when we were going through it, they said, we don't really have the time and capacity to look over hundreds of curriculum programs. What at the state can you all do to support? And part of the bill actually supports also having what does it mean to have evidence of the science of reading? So because of that, the panel obviously worked with that checklist. And so then we have review committees that review the curriculum. So as soon as LEA said, hey, we really need a little more support here, can you create a list? We want a list. So then the early literacy team began drafting that list. So I would say the very first list came after the fall review, which would have been fall of 2022. And then the reason it says draft, I'm so glad that you brought that up. The reason it says draft is because we continually add to it as the committees review. And so the last few years, it's been review in the spring and review in the fall. And so it's updated twice a year. And so we just continue to update it as those reviews are completed following I can't think of what the RIM stands for.
Instructional materials review.
Yes, why is the R first? Recommended. I'm like the recommended instructional materials review process, which is a separate code, but wanting to know that we are following that. And that's why it says draft, because it will continually change as we continue to add to it and provide more options, as Jen mentioned, as vendors continue to submit.
Yeah, is it just vendors that get to submit?
Yes.
They are published curriculum. What are you thinking though? Because as you're asking and I'm like, who else could submit? Like, tell me more.
How do you get on the list?
So the way to get on the state list is for us to review it through the RIMS, instructional materials review. So they send it into our office saying, we want you to review our curriculum. And we do ELA, we've been doing every season. Usually we used to do every other year. Now we are every season, which is twice a year. So
How
they
many
just submit,
denials were sent to
like folks who didn't
schools?
pass.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be a denial, right? What do you call it?
To a publisher, is that they wouldn't be recommended.
Well, not
So-
to a publisher, but it says here, please note, this is not an exhaustive list, and curricular programs will continue to be added as they are received. We recommend continuing to review your own curriculum using these same criteria.
So that's the checklist that you referred to a little earlier. So the local LEAs are welcome to use the same checklist we used when the publishers submit to us. Ours is a more formal process because it goes into the RIMS database. The local school communities can review their own materials, or staff will go out and meet with them. I JUAB has reached out. They're like, can you come help us review? Sure, happy to do so because the publisher has not submitted to the state. And that way the district can feel confident in their review that they picked a curriculum that would pass the checklist.
And when the district has reviewed their curriculum, they feel it's compliant, do they submit it to us at USBE?
I'll let you take that one because it comes in the fall.
At this time, no. So the timeline that Board Member Hymas mentioned earlier, the timeline has been given, even though the code doesn't say a specific timeline, we understood that you can't do it overnight. It isn't a quick process. So gave a timeline, which of course could be changed, a timeline for 2 years to get the work done. To review their own curriculum or adopt if they need to, that kind of thing. That 2 years begins next fall. So we still have another half year, I guess more than that actually, until we get there. And so you'll notice in the board rule, actually in those lines that we're looking at right now on the screen, it talks about submitting as part of that, the checklist. And so unless we're in this space where they're using something that is not, then they would need to. But if they've already reviewed, there's no issues with it, then no, we don't collect them.
Okay, I've met with some schools who say that we have, meaning the USBE has come in and said, hey, we really don't like the curriculum you're using. When would that take place?
Likely that would only happen if they are in the system of support, which means they have failed to meet the state goals, that 60% that we talked about just moments ago. And so that's when they're in the system of support. They may even have been in the system of support for multiple years where they have not been meeting that goal for several years in a row.
And is there a list of those entities or schools that are in system support?
Yes. Eventually it will be online. We've been working with IT on the early literacy data platform. So eventually it will show up on the data gateway. So we'll be able to see those. But if you would like that in the meantime, please let me know.
What I'd like is for that to be uploaded to backup so
Okay.
all board members have access to it. And in addition to the LEAs being listed, is there a designation of when those schools entered system support?
Yes, we would be able to know the year.
And could that also be included when you upload it to backup?
Absolutely.
That's what, can I ask a clarifying point? Thank you. So with that list, so we have some that are in for 1 year, it's their first year. We have some that are at risk, but not officially in the program. We have those that have been in for 2 years, 3 years. At year 4, you will hear from us. If somebody has been in the program for 4 years, we may actually come recommend closure of that charter. There typically have been charter schools at this point. Because they just aren't showing, like they have 13% kids proficient, like they're not showing progress in a 4-year. And our support intensifies every year that someone's in the program. So I'm assuming a little detail would be nice, but I sometimes go over the top with information. So would you like the ones that are at risk, those that have been in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4 kind of called out? Or do you just want who's in some level of system of support?
I would like to just know all the schools. Are we looking at 3,000 schools? Are we looking at
No,
200? Are we
it's
looking at
LEAs.
5?
It's at an LEA level. You probably know.
I want to say about 15.
9, and then we have it. Then we just.
Give us just a moment.
Thanks.
We
Do
can
you see
answer
a
that.
We
reason
can get
not to
that.
have it?
We split up the work, so it's like, oh, she does 5.
Yes.
She's going to look that up and we will
We'll
be
get
able to
that.
share that in a
Yeah,
moment. I would imagine we're more between 15 and 20, but that
It's
historically.
9 who are in the system of support, meaning they failed more than 1 year. We also have some in their internal action year, which they can accept support if they want it, but they're not required to until they fail for
like a
2 years.
soft year.
Yeah, it's like a soft entry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so there are some within that space too, but 9 that we've been supporting because they've been in it for more than 1 year.
Yeah, Chair Hymas just pointed something out. So I would like, if it's 20, I think that's doable. If you could submit that, we don't need to break it down per school.
Okay.
Was that let's not break it down per school.
And
but
it's
per
by LEA, so you fail as an LEA, not as a school,
Okay.
if that makes sense. So the system of support is at the LEA level. So the most that you're going to get is a list of 20, but it's probably less than that.
So all three of you did, thank you. So we would know in this list, just for clarity, and Molly, we haven't forgotten about you. But we would know in this list just what LEAs are receiving assistance at this time, not necessarily what level of assistance. And I think if members, because this becomes public is what I'm asking. So if members do want to know what depth you're in, I think it would be an invitation to committee or board members to reach out to staff. Is that okay?
And then in the information that's being provided, could we also request in light of Chair Hymas's concern, could you also pull, but it doesn't have to be provided in the backup, but could you pull the steps that the LEA has been directed to take in order to get out of the support system?
Yeah, so we have a document we made several years ago now that has what we do in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, that highlights what kind of support they get each year. Does that sound like what you're thinking about? Or do you want the explicit, like Ogden has chosen these supports
Yeah, I would like to know the specificity, like
Okay.
actually see.
by each LEA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, did you choose Ogden because that's my district, or did you just come up with that? 'Cause
I
that's
just
really
know
good.
they're in the
I
system of
mean,
support. They've been with us for a little while now.
Okay. So I appreciate that, and thank you. And again, I'm just I want to make sure we get it right because this is core to what our students are doing in school. So Chair, thank you, Director.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Hart?
Yes, so I've got two concerns, two different areas of concern. One is I do hear you. I hear that you said at one point that 100% of the people were that you had convened were supportive of the numbers. However, I definitely haven't heard 100% support at all, and I'm concerned because when these numbers are published and the way they're published, once they're out in that court of in the arena, so to speak, all kinds of things happen and all kinds of assumptions are made and they're used in different ways. And we need to be extra careful and responsible and diligent in what we're reporting and how we're describing our student progress or lack of progress or anything surrounding those types of issues. I don't feel that even if literacy directors or a group of expert practitioners agree, I don't think we have buy-in at the practitioner level, at the I don't, you can't throw those metrics out there without everybody involved understanding what it's measuring and how it's measuring. And this has become way too complex, and there's different ways of calculating things, and we haven't done the background work, the legwork that we need to do to make sure that we're handling student progress indicators in a responsible way. And I know that sounds harsh, but when those numbers go out, it is harsh, and the feedback on it is harsh. And we're crafting a narrative and contributing to a narrative that I'm not entirely sure is helping education in any way. I'm not saying we water down numbers. I'm not saying that we manipulate numbers. What I am saying is when we report them, we need to do it in a way that's clear and understandable by not experts, but by people simply reading a report or a press release or a whatever. And if our own practitioners feel gut punched about the metrics that have been shared, we haven't done enough. So I'm really concerned about the feedback from public comment, the fear that it creates among our classroom teachers about what's being said and how it's being reported, what they do. We have made a super complex system, and I'm not sure that it gets us closer to our goal. And I'm concerned about that. Now, for the other piece about curriculum, I'm not there. I'm not where it's okay. It is not sitting well that we have become tight on process. I am totally good with tight on outcome, but I do believe in local control. I do believe that there are many paths to successful school. And I don't believe that list of requirements is simple to get the curriculum that your community wants to use. I don't think that's simple in the least. I don't think that for example, the professional development timeline is something USB needs to concern themselves with. I understand having those resources. I am extremely happy that, and I know for a fact that LEAs and schools can call up USBE and they will be there in a minute to help them walk through selection of curriculum. And I'm especially happy that they will do that so that small LEAs and schools don't have to rely on a vendor to walk them through the curriculum selection process. However, that needs to be optional, because at the end of the day, we set standards, we set targets, and then we intervene when they're not met. We don't intervene and manage, or at least in my belief about state level, local level, school level, I just don't believe that belongs there. I'm just really concerned about getting tight on curriculum. I fully understand that if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to get the same results. But that needs to be said to the LEA. The LEA's making the decision. So what we do is we raise the standard. We give them supports and scaffolds to reach that standard. And when they don't, we say, here, we can help you. And when they really don't, then we say, okay, come on, we're going to need you to, these are some things that have moved the dial. They're known to move the dial. But we should not be at the beginning of that process saying, you must do this. Quite frankly, I don't think USBE has enough manpower to do that. I think that's a huge lift that I just don't think that's our role, nor do we have the resources to do that. If you'll scroll to the list of requirements, if that person hasn't been falling asleep because of my line 209 matters to me. And if there's anything I hope that people took away from comments that I may have made yesterday, it's that we do not leave a gap between what we expect LEAs to do and what we put in rule versus what's in law. That needs to be very tight. It matters to me that LEAs meet the requirements of law. It does not matter to me what their timeline for implementation is, what their steps for adoption is, because the steps for adoption are actually in a different code. I think we're getting too tight on a place that we don't we should not be going and we don't have the resources to go to. So I'd like
So
the
Molly-
committee to discuss it a little further, or I'd like to see if that's just me or if we need to look at amending.
So I'll jump in here. Molly, I agree with you. This is where my concern is as well. I think you articulated it much better. Like, what is our role as a state board? And like I said, I am very happy to see that this is a priority, that reading is a priority of the state board. But to get into the curriculum is difficult. So you mentioned 209, how the proposed curriculum or how an LEA curriculum meets the requirements of this section, right? I'm happy to look at that. I don't know if you have an amendment here with these, or if you want a further discussion
Well,
as of right now.
if it's just my hang up, I'm not going to go there. What I would amend, though, is removing all of that and leaving line 209. And maybe
What is the-
when you say steps towards adopting a new curriculum, we refer to the curriculum adoption process requirements that are in law. Just so somebody that reads this knows, oh yeah, I got to go there too to be in compliance. I wouldn't mind making an amendment that these things are, I don't know, in some sort suggested actions. I'm just not willing to go. And this really hits my sensibilities about reports and requirements. I just,
Let me ask,
whoa.
yeah, Dr. Thronson wants to chime in here, but let me just ask, as I'm watching the clock and I'm looking at this would be a big change. And we can work on this for the next 35 plus minutes, but is this something, I do have the same concern. I don't know about other committee members. They haven't chimed in yet, but the motion might be to postpone. I'm just going to throw that on the table as an option here. So
Yeah,
Dr.
so
Thronson.
the intention of this section, and there might be a better way to do it, is compliance. So the state law requires you to have evidence-based curriculum or evidence-informed curriculum. And it did not say you got 2 years to do that. That is something as staff, we said, we know they can't just turn and change on curriculum overnight. In future bills, we're going to be a little more thoughtful about when the timeline goes into play for some of these things, but ultimately they've had 2 years to do this. This is for those who have chosen not to make those changes in that time period and to tell us, what are you moving towards? And when are you going to do it? So that we are monitoring compliance the way we're required to do, and we're not necessarily putting them in corrective action. This is meant to be more of a support mechanism, saying you're not where you need to be, and therefore we need a little bit more information about how you're going to get to where you need to be as we move along. Sarah, please clarify. But the intention of this was, we have to do compliance. We know we're going to have some LEAs out of compliance. And instead of trying to come in with the heavy, this was intended to come in with support, saying, tell us what you're trying to do. And now as staff, we can support you more if needed. Some of them just needed 6 more months. RFPs take a long time. Adoption process is longer than it used to be. Awesome. You're moving, you're going, we're less worried about you. For those that are resistant, we have a few that are like, I'm not changing. We need to be able to have those conversations in supportive ways instead of the heavy. And that's the intention of this section. I'm not saying, and Sarah would agree, that all of these things are essential, but we do need to see movement towards compliance with the law, and how we do that might be the part that the discussion would be helpful for. I don't know how much you have. I think this is the last item on the agenda. So if we've got the time, it'd be awesome, because as staff, we're not like, this has to be it. We are like beholden to this. We are open to your thoughts and ideas, but we do feel if we are audited, we are not going to be able to show what we're doing to ensure people are in compliance with this portion of the code without being really clear to the LEAs what the expectation is and how we'll know you're meeting that expectation. So we are so open to what that should look like.
Thank you for that feedback. Member Wood and then Member Hart, you still have your hand up. We'll just call you after Member.
Sure, I just don't want to interrupt or jump in line.
Yeah, we'll go Member Wood and then back to Member Hart.
So the code is pretty direct. Each LEA shall adopt science of reading curriculum and intervention programs as advised by the Science of Reading panel described in section 53E-3-1003. So there's not a, oh, I've got to be scared, we're doing this curriculum. Those are the two lines. They shall adopt. So I think what we need to look at in there is, on all those steps, how do we help them? I really valued it. In fact, I've written a couple emails back to people, and from Vice Chair Hart's comments yesterday, we can't leave a gap. And so the law says you shall adopt. Now, how do we support that in a careful manner to give them the ability to do so without running over them and saying, okay, tomorrow you better have this in your schools. So as you move to make these changes, then I think we need to go through that section line by line. Does this help them in a guiding, helping, supporting way to fill that gap between where they're at and what the law says? But there's no play in the law. They shall adopt.
Thank you, Member Wood. Member Hart, back to you.
That is exactly right. Said much better than my long comment. I fully understand that I may have more of a problem with the law than I do. I have problems with the law. I cannot let the moment pass without also expressing this is exactly why we have to have rules that go with laws, because two lines in a law does not help an LEA. So you can't, in so many cases, just have a law that stands alone and everybody's magically going to be able to follow it, understand exactly the intent and then follow it. Totally get it. So I believe Member Wood is exactly right. We have to go and figure out how to help our LEAs comply with that law. That's why we have to be careful of the metrics we set. And then when our LEAs don't reach those metrics, we offer support. There's a whole nother issue about the science of reading curriculum, etc. But I don't think these things lead to that outcome. I see this as a lot of movement, but it doesn't necessarily get them. What they need is exactly what USBE has done with some LEAs, and they've gone out there to help them evaluate the curriculum or curriculums they're considering. So we got to take this out and do something that's laser focused on now that, or we're looking at these different programs or whatever. Help me go through the checklist and ensure that they're based on science of reading. This other stuff is their own decision. And if they did this curriculum proposal, other than the line that says the science of reading checklist, these other things may or may not get them closer to using a science of reading curriculum. They could, but that's not the essence of what the law is saying. So like I said, I understand that my problem is probably with the law, but could we work together if we can't do it here? Because I'm always afraid that when we do it like this on the fly, that we're just chopping. We're doing a chop job on, and I'm worried that it's not simple but elegant. So I'm just wondering what the committee thinks.
I'm gonna, as committees chewing on this, staff, what are your thoughts?
I think we could narrow this down to a few. If we're not anti something in terms of, we feel like as staff, we've got to be in compliance. If you all are like, no compliance needed, this section can go, but we're law abiding citizens who are trying to do what we're asked to do. So in that case, what I think we can get down to is we just need the basics, right? We believe that LEAs, the vast majority are going to do what's right. We honestly will have at least 80% that are already going to be doing this by the end of this year. Like, we have very few that are going to be out of compliance. There will be a few, just to be honest, that are going to resist and are going to need actual corrective action at some point. But the vast majority just need a little more time. So let's say that is the belief system in this model, right? So first, we want to know who's responsible. Who's going to be the person running the curriculum adoption? I think you keep I think you can drop I don't really care what your plan is towards adopting that curriculum, because there is a whole defined code that tells you how you have to go about adopting. So I think 2 can go. I think when you look at 3, they don't have a curriculum yet. So I don't know that they would be able to say how their proposed curriculum is going to meet those requirements. So I think you can get rid of 3. 4 is best practice. How are you going to train people on that curriculum? I think you could keep it. I think it could go in terms of, we're trying to make sure they're in compliance with the law, and providing professional learning on the curriculum is not a requirement of that law. So it's best practice. This is staff again going, you should be training your teachers, not just buying it, but giving them the professional learning. But for rule, I think it can go. And then you get the timeline. When are you going to be in compliance? Is that in 3 months? Is that next school year? Those are the things I think you just need to know. Who's going to do it? When are you going to be in compliance? And the final question I would love, just from going back to the support of USBE, what support do you need to do the work of adopting a new curriculum? And then if they're like, we need help using the checklist, awesome. We will get any LEA who wants to learn how to use the checklist. We'll run a training. They can bring the curriculum. They can do it. Again, we have done it before. It's recorded. They have the resources already, but sometimes people need a little more hand holding. Great. We'll offer that. But I think from a support mechanism, that's the part that we could offer. We can't do individual. We do not have the staff for that. But if there's some common elements that we can group LEAs together, like we need help with the checklist, great. We will be happy to help you with that checklist. So maybe it's just 1, 5, and what support do you need? And those are the 3 things that they have to submit. What support do you need to get into compliance? Angie can put that, if any, that's lovely. If Angie can frame that in, if that sounds good to y'all. If we can frame that language, because what support do you need is not how we write rule. Those are the 3 things. Who's running it? When will it be done? What support do you need to get it done? Those are things I think we would want to know as a staff, as well as a board who's trying to get people in compliance. And the other parts are nice to know, but they're not, I try and go to like what's required by law versus what I would like. So from what's mandatory, I think knowing who's in charge so we know who to contact in the future. When are you going to have this done by? And what do you need from us, if anything, to get it done? Because some of them do need support. I've had a couple reach out. I'm sure Sarah and her team have people reach out like, can you help us do this? Like, of course, we're happy to help you. But they need to know that support's available too. This is not just the stick. It is meant to be the support to get to compliance.
I would be interested in that. I would also be interested in the law around selecting curriculum and the science of reading law. I want those in rules, referenced in rules, so that when an LEA looks at a rule, they have a chance of meeting all of the requirements of law.
Thank you, Member Hart. I don't know if you've seen, I mean, I'm sure you have, if you remember, this law is like 1 sentence. There's not a whole lot of,
Law.
yeah, I know. Anyway, Member Leader, go ahead.
Well, I probably like most topics we discuss, most issues we discussed, like the previous ones. Some of us know too much and it's too personal to us. Others of us, like me, don't know enough, though I'm trained as an English teacher. I don't have the detailed experience that you do and Matt does with the science of reading daily. But I think it's really important that as we look at this in a sort of a general way, that we don't push the staff to the bare minimum so that they're always the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, or the board is, that they're putting, I think, and I don't know that it can't be more carefully crafted as you've explained, Jennifer, but I don't want to intimidate, as a committee, I don't want to intimidate the staff into saying, we want less, to the point that we're not doing any triage, we're only that ambulance. Because I think that doesn't use your expertise to the best benefit of students and the board's decision-making. So I just want to be cautious about, if you think we need, and I'm just choosing one out of that list, you see that because I mean, I can see how asking an LEA to provide what they're doing for professional learning as a check and a reminder to them as well as us that they are required to do professional learning. So I really think it's important. And again, I'm not saying anybody is not, but I want to honor what the staff's expertise is in saying these things are necessary to keep us and LEAs on top of this problem. So we're not in, so corrective action isn't necessary. So I don't want to intimidate you into making this so thin and so narrow, even though I, like Molly, I'm a big fan of local control. But if the law says shall, and we talk about space between the law and rule all the time, then I think we need to have a rule that helps LEAs get to where what the law requires.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Wood?
Well, I know this probably isn't related to this, but I find it interesting in line 632, 633 of the code, it says the state board shall provide the individuals with professional learning regarding change management. And I like that term, change management, because I think that's what you're doing here. You're taking LEAs where they are and you're having to manage this big change. I mean, you think about, if we want to talk about our mission and vision in terms of academic excellence, this bill has created more impact in our state in a few years than anything else. Everything we've done in terms of contracts and looking and numbers and statistics, this is it. This is change management. So these lines, we have to look at, how are we helping them change? And I appreciate that we finally have some specifics. Okay, let's delete 208, 209. Let's delete, let's do this. We talk a lot in these committees and on board meeting hours, sometimes 12 hours. Let's get to the work. Let's do what needs to be done.
And yes, and I think I might have had a little bit to do with that change management piece. If Director Thornton recalls. I also am required to go to the change management series of trainings for the next 2 years. So I will let you know how that goes. I got the email yesterday, Miss Whipke, and I've got it on my calendar. Looking forward to it, truly.
Okay. Yeah, there is a potential motion on the screen. Are there any interests in that?
I'll make the motion just so we can just vote on it and move along as necessary. I would like to, before I do that, say yes, I believe, Carol, I believe, Member Lear, that there needs to be those resources, and we don't want to be the ambulance at the end. But if we had the opportunity to do an experiment, just a small little experiment, and USBE, they offer so many opportunities for trainings and things, almost to the point where in thinking yesterday about the list of trainings, that could have been pages. And it's not a matter of it's not a matter of if there's training or not, it's which ones you prioritize at which time. I just think that if you did a training on, if you offered a training on how to adopt science, make sure that your materials are science of reading, and how to, go through the steps of an adoption of appropriate materials, I have full confidence that you would fill up that training with LEAs that want to make sure they're doing the right thing. I just firmly believe that. And we don't have to, I trust them in that way. And so it's not that I want to bully or harass into doing a bare minimum. I just really want that to be in the resources side rather than everyone must shall and apply it to everyone when the needs are of a specific few. So I would like to move that the committee, number one, add, quote, that meets the requirements of section 53G-10-306 on the end of line 207, 2, strike lines 208 through 210, and 3, add a new subsection 3 after line 211 as follows. Quote, 3, information on what supports the LEA needs from the superintendent to implement the new curriculum. Excuse me.
It should be, it's incorrect.
And we changed, sorry, you probably didn't hear this. The request was to change implement to adopt.
Yes, absolutely.
Or the LEA's new curriculum, yes. So it's
So reread section 3, Molly, see if that works for you.
Correction at number 3 and add a new subsection 3 after lines 211 as follows. Quote, 3, information on what support the LEA needs from the superintendent to adopt, should we say the LEA's new curriculum or a new curriculum?
Carol says either one.
that would be,
Because-
I think it's important.
It's got to be before they do it. They can't already make the decision.
New curriculum, maybe just.
Adopt new curriculum, how does that read?
That's better.
But
That's
just-
better.
So we're clear that it's only specific to that LEA. Does that go without saying?
Yes. But they may discover that they may do that SOS call early in the process. They may get down the road with the laborious process of curriculum adoption with their stakeholders and realize halfway through that they need support. I mean, there's so many moving parts. I just think this is better wordage to adopt new curriculum.
Thank you, Member Hart. So the motion before the committee is that the committee add, it's a 3-part motion. 1, add that meets the requirements of section 53G-10-306 on the end of line 207. 2, strike lines 208 through 210. And this is from draft 2, right? Yeah, okay. And then 3, add a new subsection 3 after line 211 as follows. 3, information on what support the LEA needs from the superintendent to adopt new curriculum. Discussion to that, we have Member Wood and then Member Lear.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Is there, and maybe you could help with the code that so 207, the individual responsible for curriculum change that meets the requirements of section 53G-10-306, but also, and is there a way we could add that in that's consistent and put in the code where curriculum is adopted? All of that, it was around, I'm thinking Senate Bill 55 last year.
But let's find what the code is.
Yeah, well, I wrote down 53G-4-402, but I'm not sure if,
4-402.
yeah, but I'm not sure if that's the exact, if there's a subsection that would be better. But just so that they as they're reading this, they know, okay, I've got to meet this code in adopting this, but I also, there's a whole adoption thing, just a reminder, there's a whole section that tells us how we adopt curriculum that's going to be used LEA wide.
Sorry, would that be amended in the motion or does that fit somewhere else?
Yeah, if there's a better place for it, I just know, I'm not trying to make
You
them,
just want it in the.
they don't need to report that back to us. I just wanted a reminder.
It looks, may I respond to that question? So it looks like it's 53G-4-402 for LEAs and -404 for charters.
Oh, it's different.
Yeah.
Does that then it gets messy. I don't want to make it
does.
messy. I just want to be helpful.
It's 53G-5-404 for charters. So yeah, it's its own code for charters, but it's the same requirements.
So Member Wood, then are you okay with how the rule would read then without?
Just leave it out. Yeah, yeah. I think
Adding
it starts getting
confusion.
messy when
Yeah.
we start having to deal with charter district as opposed to just a single LEA rule. So thank you.
As I look at, because we're talking about striking lines 208 through 210, which means we have now 1 and 5, the individual's response for curriculum change and a timeline for implementation of the new curriculum. Are those necessary? Do we need to have this list? And I'm directing this to staff.
As far as the timeline, it would be really helpful for us to know, is this a 6-month process? I mean, and here's the rationale really. If someone were to put in, we need 10 years, that's a little bit too long. Yeah, I mean, it has to be a little bit realistic as far as, and thank you, Board Member Hart, for laughing. I appreciate that very much. And so, yes, I do think that is an important piece. As far as the individual responsible, I think part of that for us is really around, is that the one you were asked about? Wasn't it individual responsible?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Is really just so we have a contact. So we know who specifically at the LEA is the go-to for that.
Seeing no other hands or lights, I'm going to restate the motion before we vote. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend draft 2 as follows. 1, add that meets the requirements of section 53G-10-306 on the end of line 207. 2, strike lines 208 through 210. And 3, add a new subsection 3 after line 211 as follows. 3, information on what support the LEA needs from the superintendent to adopt new curriculum. All in favor?
Motion.
Oh, well, we were discussing it.
Yeah,
Then
but
yes, please.
When I actually see it up there, do you feel like this is one of those, I think, because this is so important to LEAs, is the Paren 1 specifically enough information for this rule? Is it going to be too hard for those implementing this to find that information? I'm asking Matt, I'm asking Molly, I'm asking Jennifer.
Are you speaking to the code part of 1?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
is this one of the places that would be wise to put in a little more information, or is just citing the code?
The other option you have is to include by reference the SOR checklist, because that is referenced in code that there has to be the SOR panel recommendation. That is the SOR checklist. So you could add by reference the SOR checklist, and then we can put that in the reference documents. That's the type of
think
curriculum they
that's- I
have to
think
adopt.
My own personal opinion is that is brilliant.
That's the question I was asking. I
So,
just want to make it, if we're amending it, and I worry about the amending it in too much, but that's the kind of thing, if it's helpful to those who are implementing this, then I say we should add it and make it helpful, not obscure.
so we're
And
working on
that's-
an amendment
yes.
to this motion.
And we'll have to.
Keep an eye on the screen, make sure we get it right. And I know this is, go ahead, Ben.
Finish
I
the
was
word
asking,
list.
Are we talking about incorporating the science of reading checklist by reference into the rule?
Yep, that's what I think they're saying. I do think that's what they're saying. So I was just gonna add a number 4 to say, add a section into the rule, incorporating whatever the title of the document is by reference.
And then the title is Science of Reading, Evidence Informed, Core, Informed, Core Criteria Checklist. Now that's for core program materials. They're also have the evidence-based interventions. So there's going to be a couple of documents to incorporate by rule.
And are these readily available?
Yeah.
Okay, so and
The LEAs all know they exist.
and they're familiar with, they wouldn't feel like this is some.
No, this is like, yeah, we already have this thing. But
Okay,
like a new charter director who might come on next year will be like, oh, didn't know this existed. So I think it doesn't hurt to have it in there.
I just want to make sure this is helpful. In narrowing it, I still want it to be helpful.
Can we also, Angie, in that add a section in the rule and the evidence-based checklist? There are two, because with the science of reading, you have the science, but for evidence-based, you actually have to have the research saying your program has efficacy. And so we have a checklist for how you determine efficacy.
And what's the name of that?
She's looking it up.
So we're going to list all of that. We're going to say that meets the requirements of, and we're going to do the section of code, the first checklist, and then the second checklist.
Yeah,
Okay.
that will get all the components that we have produced to support them. So the title is the evaluation criteria. Yep. Criteria for evidence-based curriculum. We do hyphen.
Evidence-based.
Curriculum. This is where we get to show our Mavis teaches typing skills. Mavis Beacon. You all are not remembering Mavis. I'm so sad.
Read the motion while you're working on it.
Sure.
I can't. I don't know if
Let's see.
we just want to make sure, we're just waiting to make sure the motion is correct before we read it.
I think the B is capitalized, Carol, or any board member there,
Which is.
evidence-based. It would be.
When you
Yeah.
hyphenate them.
There we go. Nope. I agreed with you, so. Ben didn't.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend draft 2 as follows. 1, add,
I'm just gonna put this here.
okay. The,
Oh, no, that doesn't work.
that doesn't work.
Oh, there we go. Yes, thank you.
All right. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend draft 2 as follows. 1, add the following on the end of line 207. That meets the requirements of A, section 53G-10-306, B, the science of reading evidence informed core criteria checklist, and C, the evaluation criteria for evidence-based curriculum. 2, strike lines 208 through 210. 3, add a new subsection 3 after line 211 as follows. 3, information on what support the LEA needs from the superintendent to adopt new curriculum. And 4, add a section into the rule incorporating the following into the rule. 1, the science of reading evidence informed core criteria checklist. And 2, the evaluation criteria for evidence-based curriculum. All in favor say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. Okay. Any other questions on the rule itself? Any motions that would like to be made?
I do have one
Member-
question,
Member Wood.
and it's totally unrelated, but it's at the bottom. And it's about the kindergarten counts. Do we still have to submit those now that those are part of the, so they still are submitted separately? Okay, that was just a question. Thank you.
Chair,
Yes, Member Hart.
did we already voted, right? We're not in the
We
middle
voted,
of.
we voted for an amendment. Now we have nothing on the floor, but we still have this agenda item hanging over us.
Yeah,
So we need to, yeah, go ahead.
I just, I don't know how to word this. I'm trying to think of something, but I need to know of a plan to provide education or have dialogue about where those levels are set before I'm going to feel comfortable voting for this in full board. I'm willing to move it forward, but I'm going to need more to be able to support it in the full board, because I think we're just shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't have a plan. If these are, where the targets need to be, which it sounds like you did the research and the homework there, but I have a concern there. So I don't know if that's something we put into direction, or if it's my own personal problem that I need to think through. But we can't move forward with these numbers without putting more thought into the communication plan behind them, or how we're going to educate different stakeholders on what they mean, because they are going to come back and be used as arrows to our practitioners. And I can't have that. The sky is not falling on Utah students. And I can see the headlines already. I don't know how to articulate that. Can our staff is there any thoughts in that space, or am I just being out loud?
We have Sarah, and we also have Darren. So Sarah first, please.
Thank you. In regards to this, I want you to know, Board Member Hart, that we have actually, we met with UAD, which is actually, I think Darren's going to be able to tell us what UAD stands for. It's an assessment group with the districts. But when we met with them, some of the feedback they gave was improved communication around reading at grade levels. So we've already tasked ourselves to do that. So we already have a committee created, and we're going to be starting what the communication looks like. So one, we know who to go to. We know what it should look like to be really clear, like you were mentioning. In addition, we're also tasking ourselves, even though I didn't ask for it, but we feel it's really needed, an FAQs document around this. Darren, please add.
Thank you, Sarah. Darren?
Yeah, I'm Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. Just to add to what Sarah's already said, is we have worked with the Utah Association of Assessment Directors, which is one professional group. It's also the group that Brooke belongs to, or her district belongs to, and she's a participant in that group who gave our public comment this morning. After that meeting, as Sarah said, we've begun work on a frequently asked question document. The Utah Accountability Technical Manual includes a lot of description and graphics related to this topic. That document is underutilized. It's connected in places on our website as well as directly to the school report card, but it provides additional tool. One of the things I appreciate about Brooke's comments this morning was her question towards the end of her comment about understanding whether the threshold or the score that we've set is access to college and career readiness, or whether it's a minimum threshold. When the committee talked about earlier this morning on the the changing the 60% to 65% of students making a typical or better progress. That is an example of a minimum threshold or a lower end goal, whereas the reading on grade level has been established in conjunction with our expectations in Utah that are demonstrated through the standards that are adopted by the board that our students are on a college and career readiness track. Let me, if you will, Chair, give me just a minute to comment and give a little description of how this process evolved over time. Would that be okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the study that Sarah mentioned earlier, I'm going to read the first sentence in that study. This is the second one that was done in 2023 to help staff understand whether the reading on grade level cut scores that were established based on a previous study were still applicable. But the first statement, I think, helps us understand the answer to Brooke's question. The purpose of this predictive analysis is to determine the approximate. So again, it's an estimate, but we're doing it in as scientifically a process or method as we can to approximate kindergarten, first, second, and third grade Lexile cut scores needed to achieve proficiency on the third grade Utah Readiness Improvement, Success, and Empowerment, or the RISE test. So then I went to the standard setting document that was completed in September of 2014. At that time, this report was provided to the board after a group of educators took the results from the first year's administration of what was then titled the SAGE ELA score, specifically to our discussion today, the third grade, and provided information that the Board of Education at that time determined and established the cut scores for proficiency on the SAGE, which is now the third grade RISE test. Remembering that what we're trying to do with Rogel is establish this approximation of a trajectory for students being aligned with that when they take the third grade ELA test. A statement from that document that was provided to the Board of Education in September of 2014 gives us the answer to Brooke's question from earlier. It says the expectation would be that students graduating from high school in Utah are college and career ready, and students in lower grades are on a trajectory to be college and career ready. So Board Member Hart, I think to your point about making sure we're clear with the community about what this information is trying to tell us as practitioners, to tell students, to tell their parents, and tell other public members, entities, is we're using the reading on grade level as not a minimum threshold, but we've established that, we meaning the Board of Education, all the way back to that 2013 standard setting process that was completed on the third grade SAGE, aka RISE assessment, that when we provide this information, we're telling a student that we believe, it's approximate word, knowing that no assessment is a definitive truth, but this is a tool we're using to try to approximate for that parent, for that educator, for the broader community, whether students are on track or are on the trajectory for being college or career ready.
Member Hart.
Yeah, that is very helpful. And I'm using all of what it seems like hundreds of years of sitting in classrooms about education and education statistics to comprehend it. My point is somehow we have to encapsulate that so that we're educating our public so that it's understood. I have no idea how to do that. I also understand it's a moving target, but I definitely think we need to put some time and attention to communicating what you just said in a way that somebody who has no background can completely understand. Because what it looks like is far different than what it actually is in terms of what our students are reading at. The second point is, if we're going to send information out, and this is a broader issue, okay, so I'm going to just say this and be done. Before we send out information to various stakeholders, it must go to our practitioners and our LEAs so that they know what's about to be told to our legislators, to our public, to different stakeholders. we can't have it where something's released and our LEAs aren't prepared for the questions that their constituents will be asking. So I just feel this, as we become more scientific in our data and our data analysis and our practices in our classroom, we cannot ignore how that creates more of a chasm between the general public, who their point of reference is what they experienced in school, and how far we've come in learning so much more about how students learn and how we measure that, and how we do so much more, and we need to take credit for that, but we also need to do that, we need to be able to communicate it. So I'm looking forward to that ongoing conversation. It's a concern of mine. We're just getting to the point where we're using metrics that are even hard for classroom teachers to understand, and it makes them anxious, and when a teacher's anxious, they don't teach as well. So I just want to continue that conversation.
Thank you, Member Hart. As a reminder to the committee, we started at 9:03 and we are at 12:03 now.
3 items out. Okay.
And yes. So there is a potential motion on the screen. And I'm looking at you, Member Hart, as you've been bringing up these thoughts and discussions. Is this a motion that you would like to see, this potential motion? Would you like to move the rule onto a full board? Is there time? Is there another motion that you'd like to see?
I think the more I talk about it, the more it's something I'd just like to talk offline with our staff in a greater, in a broader context. Maybe talking about how we structure our standards and assessment work. I'm interested in looking at standards and accountability. I'm interested in spending more time communicating what we're doing broadly. So where's the motion to move the whole rule?
Well, Member Wood has a couple of motions, but
okay.
I appreciate your feedback. Staff now has an idea of what's coming anyway.
Okay.
So Member Wood.
I move to delete lines 212 through 214. Now that we're incorporating the documents into the rule, then those that are adopting the curriculum will have those to work with. And I did consult with staff before making this motion.
I would ask staff what this does in their view, what deleting these lines would do.
I think it would be fine. I think the way that you all have worked together to rewrite, it was beautiful. You guys did an amazing job. I think it will be fine with the 3 criteria that you put in.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is to strike lines 212 to 214. Any discussion to that? Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, I would speak in opposition to the motion. I think that 212 and 214, we were just talking about the confusion that LEAs and practitioners have in the field. I thought that was the last 40 minutes of what we've been discussing. These lines provide that clarity. It's not just referring them to a checklist. It's saying, this is what you need to do if you don't want to choose a state-approved curriculum. So I think the clarity is worth it. We're adding 2 lines to code, millions of lines that are already. I just don't see. I think that actually don't see a true benefit. So I would just suggest that we keep it in. Thank you.
Thank you,
Can I ask
Member Wood.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
To Member Wood?
No, to Member
The
Carey.
motion or this?
To the motion.
Oh, to Member Carey?
No, to Member Carey.
Yeah.
Didn't we just put it in, go to the amendment that we passed? What am I confused about? I think we just put it in the amendment that we passed, so we don't need to say it twice. is that the intent of your motion, Member Wood?
Well, my intent of my motion when I went and talked to staff was to change because we don't refer to it as the science of reading checklist. So I said, don't we need to amend that language so that it aligns with the language we used up above? So my original intent was not to delete the lines. But when I talked to staff, they said, oh, well, we probably don't need those lines because we've referred to it up above. So I'm okay with either. It's just we need to use common terminology. If it's in there, use the right terminology
Yeah.
or get rid of it.
I'd prefer to keep, I understand what Vice Chair Carey is saying here. I prefer to keep it as well. It just gives an area. From what I understand, the checklist is there. People can look at it. But this says, if you choose a curriculum that's not on this list, refer to the checklist and attach the checklist to their proposal. Right? And maybe it does say that at the top with the checklist. As far as I understand, it's just a checklist. But this gives clarity to say, for those LEAs who say, yeah, I can do it with the curriculum that's not on there. This gives them the information on how to ask for that. Is that right? So I'd speak against the motion as well.
Isn't number 4 the science of reading checklist?
Yes, the checklist is on there. Lines 212 to 214 or subsection 3C is saying if the curriculum chosen by an LEA is not on that list, now what? Right? And then it's saying the LEA shall complete the science of reading checklist, which is
Okay.
referenced in the new part,
Okay.
and attach the checklist to their proposal.
Okay.
So if they're going to look at the checklist, which is now in the rule, they can put it to their proposal. Obviously, if it doesn't make sense, then you probably shouldn't submit it, but
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
amend my motion to just amend the language of science of reading checklist to the terms that we've been using up above.
does that
Yeah,
work?
that's,
And that would be a technical. I don't even know if we need to vote on that, do we? Or is that just, well,
I
all
just
in
wanted to
favor,
make
say
sure it
aye.
was in there.
Aye.
I just,
Voted.
I thought Leanne's point was to not use multiple names for the same things, because that was confusing.
I should probably look through the entire rule and update it. You got a second motion?
I move that the committee approve R277-406 draft 2 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-406 draft 2 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Discussion to that motion?
I think we've had plenty.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I believe that passes unanimously. Thank you, committee, for this work. Thank you, staff, for letting us put you through the ringer. All those online, we appreciate it. We are adjourned.